They called me to my father's study on the best day of my brother's life. I could hear it through the whole house on the way up. The cheering in the training yard, the steward shouting orders for a feast, somebody ringing the chapel bell as if a god had been born under our roof. Hayden had awakened that morning, Sword Saint, the rarest blade skill the church had blessed in a generation. The house of Rockwood had its heir, and the heir was not me. My father did not look up from the window when I came in. He told me, without turning, that I would leave the estate before nightfall and never use the Rockwood name again. He said it the way a man reads a number off a ledger. I stood very still. Why, father? He turned then and looked at me the way you look at something you've stepped in. He said I had never once trained with a blade, that I had spent my years counting coins and shuffling papers like a clerk instead of standing in the yard like a man. A house built on strength, he told me, could not afford a soft son standing next to a sword saint. I had run his estate for 3 years, quietly. Every contract, every harvest, every debt called in at the right season. The revenue had climbed more than 40% under my hand, and not one copper of that credit had ever been spoken aloud in this room. He knew. He simply weighed it as nothing against a sword. I knew exactly when he had decided I was nothing. I was 15. The skill had just woken in me. Divine solution, the priests called it. A thing that answered any question with only a yes or a no. So I had asked it the question a boy asks when he wants to make his father proud. Would House Rockwood prosper? The answer had come back flat and certain. No. My father heard a child insult his bloodline. He called the skill a scam to my face and never forgave it. 3 years, and his jaw still tightened when he looked at me. A night came forward. One I had overseen myself. Men I had paid on time every month. He flicked a single silver coin onto the floor at my feet. Preparation money, he sneered. He told me I could leave it there if I was too proud, and made sure to mention I should be grateful for that much. 1 coin. I looked at it on the floorboards. A single silver bought a week of bread if a man was careful, and nothing at all if he wasn't. They were not setting me free. They were betting I would die on the road and save them the trouble. I picked it up anyway. I have never in my life been too proud to bend down. No one came to see me off. Not my mother. Not Hayden, who was too busy being adored to spare a thought for the brother he was discarding. So as the gate came into view, I did the only thing left that was mine. I asked. I had learned long ago how to use it. The skill never told you how. It only ever answered the exact question you put to it. Yes or no, nothing more. Ask the wrong question, and the truth walks straight past you. Ask the right one, and there was nothing in this world it would not show me. Will I leave this kingdom alive? Yes. Will I ever stand in this hall again? The answer landed without weight, without mercy. Yes. I almost stopped walking. Will this house still be standing in 3 years the way it is now? No. Métis never lied. Métis had never once been wrong, and every soul behind those walls was certain I carried a broken trinket out the gate. Old Sebastian was waiting in the archway. He had been the steward of this house since before I was born, and he had raised me more truly than the man upstairs ever had. He caught my sleeve, glanced once at the empty courtyard, and pressed something into my palm, a small cloth purse, heavy with coins. I argued with your father until my voice gave out, he said, low and fast. Take it, please. I felt the weight, 10 silver at least. From his own savings, the man had no other inheritance to give. Sebastian, this is everything you have. Whatever they decide in this house, he said, and his old voice finally cracked. You were never the worthless one. I am not a man who weeps easily. I held on to him anyway, this once, longer than was dignified. Then I closed my hand around his coins, and his 10 became my whole future. Thank you, I told him. I'll spend every coin like it's the last one I'll ever see. I climbed into the waiting carriage. 2 escort knights swung up to ride with me. The gate shut behind us with the sound I felt in my teeth, and the only home I had ever known slid away into the dust. 3 days on the road taught me something the study had not. The 2 knights riding escort were too watchful. They whispered when they thought I dozed. They kept measuring the distance to the tree line with their eyes, and they kept their hands near their hilts even when the road was empty. By the 3rd afternoon, I could not pretend it was nerves any longer, so I asked the question I did not want answered. Métis, did my brother send these 2 to kill me before we reached the border? Yes. I sat with that for a long moment, watching the hills roll past. My own brother. Not exile, not banishment. A grave by the roadside where no one would come looking. Hayden could not be the one true Rockwood, while an older son still breathed somewhere, who might one day come back with a claim. So the cleanest thing was to erase me entirely, and a sword saint's order was not the kind these men would refuse. I had no blade, no combat skill, no strength to speak of, nothing in this carriage but 2 armed killers, and a voice in my head that only said yes or no. So I made the voice enough. Should I run the moment they stop? No. Tonight, then, after dark? Yes. I asked it everything. The timing, the direction, the hour. The knights muttered to each other about how strange it was that the boy never seemed afraid. They had no idea that the most dangerous thing in that carriage was the quiet one keeping score. The inn that night sat alone against the dark, the last stop before the border forest. The knights took the room across the hall and drank themselves loud, certain I had nowhere to go. I lay in the dark and worked. This is the part no one ever sees. The skill does not come for free. Question after question. Is the corridor clear now? Is the back door barred? Is the stable boy awake? Which road past the inn runs safe tonight? And with every answer, something behind my eyes pulled tighter. By the time I had my path mapped, the candle had swum into 2 flames, and my skull was a single white line of pain. I touched my lip, and my fingers came away dark. A nosebleed, slow and steady. The price the Oracle takes out of the only body I own. I pressed my sleeve to it and breathed through the dizziness until the room held still. That was the thing they never understood. If this ever failed me, if my body gave out before the answer came, I had nothing else. No sword to fall back on, just a clever question and a nose that would not stop bleeding, but it had not failed yet. I went out the window and down into the dark while the knights were still laughing. West, not north. Matus had been plain about that. The northern forest was where the monsters were and where the knights would think to hunt. I heard them, hours later, discover the empty room and gallop the wrong way, swearing about what Hayden would do to them. I lay flat in a ditch a stone's throw off the road and let them ride past into their mistake. Then I walked all night. Is the left fork safe? Is anything hunting on this path in the next hour? One small yes after another, threading between every bandit camp and every beast before it ever knew I was there. By dawn, I was alive, and that was a miracle no blade in my family could have bought. I had been walking a long time when the wagon found me. A round, mustached man with a load of trade goods slowed his horses and looked me over. A young fellow alone at the edge of a monster wood. No escort, no horse, no sense. He asked if I was a mercenary or some runaway lordling. I gave him neither name nor truth, only that I was bound for the Empire. His name was Nolan, and he was the first kind face I had seen since Sebastian. He told me to climb up before something with teeth made the choice for me, so I did. We traveled together through country that should have been crawling with danger, and it never touched us. Every time the trees thickened or the road forked, I asked my quiet question and steered us wide of whatever waited. Nolan kept shaking his head and laughing about it. I have driven this road for years, lad, he said, and I have never once seen it this quiet. You've got a gift for trouble. He grinned at me, the avoiding kind. He had no idea how right he was. I only smiled and watched the road. The border came on the 4th day, a gatehouse, a barrier pole, and a guard who took one look at a young man with no papers and smelled opportunity. He told me, slow and meaningful, that crossing required proper documents, that a lone traveler with none looked suspicious, and that suspicious things had a way of disappearing into a long, unpleasant wait. Then he let the sentence hang, the way greedy men do, waiting to be paid for a problem he had invented on the spot. I did not argue. I asked Matisse a single thing. Would 1 silver settle him? Yes. So I pressed a coin into his palm and watched the suspicion melt clean off his face. He waved us through and wished me a pleasant stay in the Empire, as though we were old friends. It cost me another of Sebastian's coins, but the pole lifted, the wheels rolled forward, and just like that, I crossed out of the Varan kingdom and into the Aldan Empire, out of the reach of the house that wanted me dead. The Empire was a different size of thing entirely. Bellwater rose up out of the plain behind tall stone walls, a border city so old and so safe that Nolan told me it had not been attacked in 50 years. The streets were full and loud and indifferent to me, which after the last few days felt almost like kindness. Nobody here knew the name Rockwood. Nobody here knew there had ever been a son to throw away. Nolan reined in near the market and told me this was as far as our roads ran together. I thanked him, properly, the way you thank a man who carried you out of reach of your own brother without ever knowing it. Until next time, lad. He clasped my hand and nodded toward the city's heart. Border walls never been tested, but that's not what to look at. Go see the bell. Everyone does. Then he flicked the reins and was gone into the crowd, and the road that had given me my first ally folded shut behind him. I followed the crowd, and I understood the moment I saw it. The whole city was built facing one thing, a bell tower at its center, taller than anything around it, and hung in its top a great silver bell broad enough to swallow a man whole. The light caught it and held. I stood under it longer than I meant to. An old townsman shuffled up beside me, proud as a grandfather, and told me all about it. The bell was their guardian, he said, watching over Bellwater. It rang every day at noon, the most beautiful sound in the world to hear, so that every soul in town could tell the hour by it. He said it the way other men speak of a god. It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen, I told him, and I meant it. I did not yet know how much that bell would matter. I only marked it the way I marked everything in those days, quietly, completely, filed away where I would not lose it. The whole town turned toward that silver weight as if it could keep them safe. I wondered idly what would happen on the day it had to. If I was going to eat, I needed coin. And in the Empire, that road ran through the Adventurer Guild. The hall was full of exactly the kind of men my father would have respected. Broad, scarred, loud about their kills. The sort who measured a person's worth in the size of the thing they had last put down. I walked past all of it to the counter and registered honestly. No combat skill, I told the young woman at the desk. None at all. Sign me up anyway. She was polite about it. She explained that the ranks ran from S at the top down to G at the bottom. Asked again whether I truly had no fighting ability, and when I said no, she gently steered me toward the smallest, safest jobs and wrote me down at G. The registration cost 1 silver. I paid it and felt the bite. 9 coins left to my name, give or take, and a card that said in the eyes of this whole city, I was nobody. That suited me. Let them think it. I had already done the only sum that mattered. I would never beat a monster with a sword I could not hold, but a man who can ask the world a question and always get the true answer. That man does not need to fight. He needs to trade. Knowing what a thing is truly worth before anyone else does is the oldest fortune there is. Combat was a dead road. Commerce was wide open, and I already knew exactly how I would walk it. That evening, I went back to the bell. The square had emptied. The light was going down behind the tower, and the silver bell hung dark against an orange sky. I stood under the thing the whole city trusted to keep it safe, with 9 coins, no name, and a skill the people who made me had spat on. I thought about the coin on the study floor, about the knives on the road, about a brother who would rather see me in a ditch than risk me ever coming home. They thought the matter was finished, a burden thrown out with a week of bread, a problem solved. I asked Matis one last thing, the only question that mattered to me now. Will I rise high enough that they cannot pretend I do not exist? Yes. So I made my vow under the bell. Quiet. The way I do everything. I would build something so large that the family who discarded me would one day have to lift their eyes to look at it. I would make them need the sun they threw away. And when that day came, when they finally looked up, I would be the one deciding what happened next. They had given me 1 coin and called it preparation. It was going to be enough. 3 days in Bellwater taught me that a vow under a bell buys nothing for breakfast. So on the 4th morning, I went to the only place where I had an edge no one could see, the market. It ran the length of the lower quarter, more than 50 stalls jammed shoulder to shoulder, the air thick with the smell of fish and tallow and other men's sweat. Merchants stood behind their tables, guessing at the worth of everything they touched. I did not have to guess. I had metis. I walked it slow, stall by stall, and at each one, I asked the same quiet question. Is anything here worth far more than its asking price? The answer came the way it always came, flat and certain, and without a flicker of doubt. No, no, no. I passed pottery and pelts and cheap charms a dozen times over, and the verdict never changed. I was not discouraged. A man who knows the truth can afford to be patient. Somewhere on this street, there was a mistake waiting, a thing the world had mispriced, and I only had to keep asking until I found it. Then, at a cluttered table near the end of the row, my eyes landed on a plain blue vase, dusty, unremarkable, shoved behind a stack of clay bowls like an afterthought. I asked. Yes. I kept my face still. The stall owner saw me looking and started his patter. Good eye, he said. That blue ware was popular abroad, going for 12,000 and worth every coin. I let him talk. Then I did the thing every buyer does, the thing he expected, and turned to leave. He talked himself down to 10,000 before I reached the next stall. I paid it. 10,000, nearly all the working capital I had scraped together. Then, with the vase wrapped under my arm, I asked Matisse the only question that mattered. Is the true value above 50,000? Yes. Above 70? Yes. 7 times what I had paid. I stood in the middle of that loud, stinking street and felt, for the first time since the gate, something that was almost joy. Joy, it turned out, was the cheap part. I carried the vase to a back alley buyer, a burly man whose hands looked better made for skinning monsters than judging porcelain. He turned it over twice, set it down, and named his price. 7,000, less than I had paid for it. I told him what it was. I told him this blue ware sold for a fortune back in the Varan kingdom, and that he knew it. He did not like that. He wanted to know on what authority a stranger walked into his shop and questioned his appraisal. And when I had no answer, that wasn't a voice only I could hear, he told me to take the offer or get out. I tried a second shop down the same alley, nearly the same insult, delivered with a sneer instead of a shrug. And standing there with 70,000 worth of porcelain under my arm, and no one in the world who would believe me, I finally understood the shape of my own gift. Métis could tell me what a thing was worth. It could not make another man believe it. Knowing the truth and getting paid for it were two different trades, and I only had one of them. Knowing what it's worth means nothing, I said to the empty alley. If no one believes me, I needed proof. I needed a name. I needed people who could do the things the voice in my head could not. The guild, partners, a reputation a buyer would trust without my having to beg for it. I turned that over as I walked, and I was so deep in the turning that I did not hear the four men step out behind me. They had read me the moment I walked in. Fine clothes in a rough quarter, a soft young man with something wrapped under his arm. The leader wore his hair in a stiff ridge down the center of his scalp and a short blade on his hip, and he spoke to me almost gently, the way you speak to something you have already decided to take. The town was dangerous for a soft young lord, he told me. They would take the coins and the fine clothes, and in exchange, they would let me keep my life. A generous trade, the way he said it. I asked Métis if I could talk my way out. No. If I could outrun them. No. The answers came fast and flat and completely useless, because every one of them ended in the same place. There was nothing to do that would work. I ran anyway. A man does not stand still just because a voice tells him standing or running come to the same end. They caught me before I cleared the alley mouth. The rest I will not walk you through in detail, because there is nothing in it worth seeing. Only the hard ground, and four men who did this for a living, and a voice in my skull that knew the exact worth of a porcelain vase and could not lift a single finger to help me. An answer cannot throw a punch. I learned that on the ground, with the truth ringing useless in my head. They started going through my coat for the coins. I braced for the rest of it. A voice cut across the alley, clear, hard, and used to being obeyed. That's enough. Step away from him. I felt the hands leave my coat. I rolled enough to see her. Golden hair, a rapier already drawn, the colors of some knight's order on her shoulder. The thug with the ridge of hair took one look at those colors and went pale. There was a snap of wind off the rapier's tip, a crack like a slung stone, and the four of them were simply gone, scrambling over each other to get out of that alley. She crossed to me and crouched, and the hardness went out of her voice all at once. I couldn't just walk past that. Her hand was already checking my arm, brisk and certain. Are you hurt? I told her I would live. It came out rougher than I meant it. I'm no noble. I got an elbow under me and pushed up against the wall. Just an adventurer now, and I owe you one. She waved that off the way I would learn. She waved off most things she thought were obvious. Protecting citizens was a knight's duty, she said, not a debt, and she would hear nothing about reward. But she frowned at the cut of my coat, the silver trim of it gone gray with alley dust, and her advice was the first useful thing anyone in Bellwater had given me for free. Keep those fine clothes covered. She helped me upright. They make you a mark. She told me her name was Eve. I gave her mine, and as she watched me limp out of that alley with the vase still, somehow, unbroken under my arm, I understood that I had just met the second person in this empire worth trusting, and that I had found her exactly the way the wretched lordling she had rescued was supposed to, flat on my back, saved by someone else's strength. I did not intend to stay that man for long. That night, I learned the bottom of where I had fallen. The cheapest inn in Bellwater did not rent rooms. It rented floor. For a few coppers, a man got a stretch of boards and a blanket too thin to call a blanket, in a low room packed with more than 10 other men I had never met and would never see again. They snored and muttered, and one of them watched my coin pouch with the patience of a cat, so I slept with it under me, on bruised ribs, with my back to the wall and one eye half open. The heir of a great house, who had once raised an estate's revenue 40% without anyone bothering to thank him, lay on a tavern floor, guarding 9 silver coins with his own spine. I want to be honest about that night. It was not noble suffering. It was just misery, the small grinding kind. And somewhere in the worst of it, staring at a water stain on a ceiling I would never see in daylight, the misery cooled into something harder and more useful. I had the Voss. I had Métis. I had 2 people in this whole empire who had shown me a kindness, and one of them I had only just met. That was not nothing. That was a foundation. A man does not climb by waiting for the floor to feel better. He climbs by deciding the floor is temporary and then making it true. By morning, I was not angry anymore. I was working. The missing piece had a face I already knew. Nolan had given me a ride toward this city in the first place, and he had a shop now, a real one, a front on a good street, contacts up and down the region. and a name that buyers trusted on sight. Everything I lacked. He greeted me like a road friend and listened to my idea over the counter, and I watched the shrewdness wake up behind his warmth. I told him what I wanted to do. Clarion feathers. I had asked Métis the right questions, narrowing it down the way I always had to. Yes, by no, until I had it exact. The price was going to spike in about 3 weeks, more than 10 times what it sold for now. I wanted to buy every feather in the region before it did. He stared at me for a long moment. Every feather in the region? He set both hands flat on the counter. Lad, if you're wrong, we're finished. I'm not wrong. I held his eyes. Buy every feather you can find. All of it. Trust me. It was the trust that did it in the end. Not the argument, because I had no argument I could give him. No chart, no rumor. Nothing but my own flat certainty. He had seen me dodge trouble on the road, like a man reading a map no one else could hold. He decided that was worth a gamble. We agreed on a cover story so no one would catch the pattern and start bidding against us. And then we started buying. We bought quietly and we bought everything. 450 feathers, in the end, pulled in under the cover story one small lot at a time, so the market never felt the hand closing around it. It emptied us. The cash went first, then the credit, then the shelves themselves, until Nolan's shop stood there with bare boards where his stock used to be, and a strongbox with nothing in it but dust. To anyone walking past, it looked exactly like a business dying. People talked, and then Eve came through the door. She looked at the empty shelves, and then at me, and the brisk confidence she wore like armor had a crack in it. Adrian, she stopped in the middle of the bare floor. The shelves are empty. Please tell me you know what you're doing. I understood her fear. From where she stood, it looked like madness. A man she had pulled out of an alley a few weeks back had talked her road merchant friend into pouring every coin they had into a single commodity nobody else wanted. She was not wrong to be afraid. She just did not know what I knew. 3 more weeks, I told her. We hold. I'm sure of it. Nolan managed a weak laugh from behind the empty counter and admitted his nerve was thinner than it looked. I did not blame either of them. The only thing standing between us and ruin was a voice no one else could hear, and the nerve to act on it while everyone I cared about begged me to stop. So every night, alone, I asked again, is the spike still coming? Yes. Still within 3 weeks? Yes. I asked it more times than I will admit. The way a man checks a lock he already knows is shut. The answer never changed. I held. The spike came on the day Métis said it would. I will not pretend I knew the cause, and the cause did not matter. What mattered was that across the region, the price of a clarion feather climbed and kept climbing, past double, past 5 times, until it stood at more than 10 times what we had paid for ours. And we owned all of them. We sold the whole stock in a span of days, while the price held at its peak and the rest of the market scrambled to understand what had happened. When the last lot cleared and Nolan tallied the final figure, he had to add it twice before he believed his own ledger. 23 million. He sat down hard behind the counter. He said the number out loud, then said it again, slower, as if the second saying might make it real. He told me he would never doubt that voice of mine again, though he still did not know it was a voice, only that his strange young partner had luck the gods themselves seemed to fear. I let him think it was luck. It was easier than the truth, and the truth was mine to keep. 23 million, my first fortune. The first time the answer in my head had become something I could hold in my hands, stack on a counter, and use. I had walked into Bellwater with 9 silver coins and a vow no one had heard. I walked out of that day a wealthy man, and quietly, in the careful way news travels among merchants, a frighteningly fortunate trader whose name was just beginning to be worth knowing. It was a good day. I let myself have it, but I did not forget the alley. Money had bought me a great deal in the space of a few weeks. Everything except the one thing I had wanted on that floor with 4 men over me. Money could not throw a punch for me. It could not make my father look up. For that, I would need more than a full strongbox. I would need power that stood on its own 2 feet, and people who could do the things neither coin nor oracle ever would. I had the first fortune. Now, I had to find the rest. I had banked my first fortune and gone quiet about it. I had a partner who trusted my luck, a knight who'd patched my ribs and told me my clothes made me a target, and a coin's worth of caution still riding in my pocket out of old habit. What I did not have, what I would not have for a long time yet, was a name my family had to reckon with, so they came looking for the man they thought I still was. And I never saw them do it. My brother rode into Bellwater the same week I left it. Hayden Rockwood came through the broken part of town with his men at his back, and the first thing he did was laugh at it. The wall had a hole in it from the last bad season of beasts, and the houses near it wore their scars. And he looked at all of that and decided the Empire was soft. A subordinate told him the place had been mauled by a swarm, and the soldiers hadn't held. Hayden's face did the thing it always did when something cost less than him. It curled. Soldiers who couldn't manage a few beasts, he said, weren't soldiers. A whole country built on men like that could be walked into on a quiet afternoon. That was the part of him that frightened people who knew swords. The sword saint skill had awakened in him the day they threw me out, and ever since, the world had agreed he was the future of the house. He had never once been told no by anyone who could enforce it. He looked at a wounded border town and saw a door someone had left open. He had come for me. He just didn't know I was already gone. He went to the one man in Bellwater who might know where I'd gone. Viscount Becker governed the town, and the Viscount had met me once, in the worst of the chaos, and decided he liked me. I didn't know that yet either. I was learning, slowly, that the world keeps records of you in rooms you've never entered. Becker received my brother with the kind of courtesy you spend on someone you've already measured. Hayden named me, asked after his exiled elder brother, the coward, the one who couldn't hold a blade, and the Viscount's expression shifted by a single degree. That was all it took. A lord who has governed long enough learns to read a hatred the way other men read weather. He understood, in one breath, that these two brothers were not family looking for family. One of them wanted the other in the ground. So Becker lied. He said he was a good man, your brother, a better one than you seem to think. Then, before Hayden could turn that into anything, he added that he'd only spoken with me the once when the town was burning, and that where I'd gone after, he truly couldn't say. One of Hayden's men didn't like the answer, and leaned on the old lord for a better one. Becker's own knight stepped between them without a word, hand resting where a hand rests when it means it. Hayden, who could cut any one of them in a duel and knew it, also knew a Viscount's manor was a bad place to start a war he hadn't planned. He pulled his temper back in. He left without what he came for. After the doors closed, the knight muttered that he'd never seen brothers hate each other quite like that. Becker, quiet, guessed the rest of it on his own, that a martial house had thrown out a son for lacking a sword. He was right. He just didn't say it out loud. Outside, my brother stopped pretending to be patient. He told his men to keep looking. Every road, every guild, every name. And then he said the part he should have kept behind his teeth. He swore he'd find me and finish what the road had failed to. He swore he'd take the head of the house for himself, and that no half-blood scam skill coward would stand between him and it. Nolan heard him. My partner was crossing the lane with a ledger under his arm, close enough to catch every word, and he had the sense God gives careful men not to slow down while he did it. He kept walking. He kept his face. Inside, I think, something went cold and stayed cold. He'd shaken my hand on a fortune 3 days ago, and now he was listening to a Rockwood promise to kill me. That brother of his wants him dead, he said to no one. Lo, the way you talk when the thing you've learned is too big to hold quietly. And the fool's gone and joined the army where I can't watch him. He went to the guild and confirmed it. I'd put my name down for the Imperial intake and left for the capital road. 2 men were hunting the same person through the same town that week. One of them loved me. One of them wanted me dead. And by the grace of bad timing and a Viscount's lie, they never once stood in the same room. I owe a great deal of what came after to a noose that simply never tightened. People kept loosening it for me when I had no idea it was there. I'd like to tell you the danger that nearly ended me that year was my brother. It wasn't. It was something older, and it had no name I'd want to use. So I'll give you the one the old men used, the Greymore. It came the way the worst things do, while everyone was still arguing about smaller ones. I was near the wall when the horns went up, and by the time I reached the street below the breach, the swarm was already at it. Hundreds of lesser beasts boiling against the stone, and behind them, taller than the wall itself, the thing that led them. It was the size of a house. Its hide sat on it like plate armor, gray and scaled, and one of its eyes was a long-healed scar, sealed shut by some old wound it had survived and remembered. The arrows did nothing. The thrown stones did nothing. It lowered that armored skull and drove it into the wall like a battering ram made of muscle and grudge, and the wall, which had already been broken once, gave up. An old veteran beside me went white and said its name. 50 years, he kept saying. 50 years ago it came, and it took half the town with it, and we put up a bell so we'd never forget, and now it's back like it remembered the way. That was when the soldiers around us stopped being soldiers. You can watch courage leave a crowd. It leaves all at once, like heat off a stone. Our strongest charged it anyway. They were brave, and they were trained, and it did not matter. The result was the same for all of them, and I will not walk you through it. The line that had been a defense became a noise, screaming and running, and the breach stood open with nothing behind it but people who couldn't fight, and a monster that had waited half a century to come back. I couldn't swing a sword. Everyone who could was already down, but I could do the one thing none of them could. I could know. Is it about to charge the gate? Yes. Will it turn left after? No. Right then. I asked Métis the first question with my heart in my throat and got the flat certainty back, and the beast did exactly what the answer said it would, a half breath before it did it. That half breath was everything. That half breath was the only weapon I had ever owned. I stopped running and started calling. "It can't break that gate," I shouted. "Until it does. Get the people out. All of them. Now, the back lanes. Go." Heads turned. A man who isn't fighting and isn't fleeing is a strange enough thing in a rout that people listen to him just to understand him. I took that half second of attention and spent it. Children and the old got moved. The few fighters still standing, I aimed at the smaller beasts, the ones a person could actually kill, and I kept the Greymore for myself. Eve found me in the middle of it. She was already hurt, favoring one side, blood not all of it the beast's, and she planted herself in front of a knot of children with her rapier up and the wind already singing off it. "Children, behind me, run." Then, to me, fast. No time for anything soft. "I'm hurt, not finished. Tell me where to hit it." So I told her. Its scarred eye was sealed, but the good one wasn't, and a blind side is a door if you know exactly when it opens. "Eve, its left eye. On my mark." I asked Métis. "Now?" "Not yet. Now. Trust me. Now." She trusted me. That is the part I still don't fully understand and have never stopped being grateful for, that a trained knight took the word of an unarmed stranger in the middle of the worst day of her life and put her blade exactly where his voice said to. The wind edge took the beast across its seeing eye, and it screamed and recoiled, and for a moment, one moment, the thing that had eaten a town was hurt and confused and hours to move. But every question cost me. I could feel it now, the way you feel a coin running out. The first nosebleed had already come and gone. The second one didn't stop. I had the plan by then. There was only one fixed thing in a town full of broken ones. One object heavy enough to matter and impossible to move by force. The Guardian Bell. They'd hung it after the Greymore's first visit. A mass of dark metal on chains as thick as my leg, in the tower at the center of town. You could not lift it, but you could let it fall. And if I could put the beast in one exact place at one exact instant, gravity would do what every sword in Bellwater could not. So I started walking the Greymore home. A flinch here, a thrown stone there, Eve's blade where I called it, herding a house-sized monster a few steps at a time toward the spot under the tower, asking Métis the same question over and over. Is this the line? Will it follow? Now left, now hold. And somewhere in there, the world went out. It wasn't gradual the way I'd been warned. The headache that had been building behind my eyes simply crested, white and total. And then there was nothing. No dusk, no smoke, no beast, black. I put my hand up in front of my own face and could not tell you whether it was there. I was standing in open ground, blind, with a monster the size of a house somewhere close enough that I could feel the ground take its weight. I want to be honest about that minute. I was sure I was going to die in it. I could hear the thing breathing. I could hear it turn. Eve was screaming something at me, that I was bleeding from the eyes, that I had to stop, that I'd kill myself before the beast managed it. And I understood I was out of body to spend, and that the only thing I had left was the one thing that had blinded me. So I spent it anyway. I couldn't see where the Greymore was, so I didn't ask to see. I asked the only kind of question I had left, the kind that needs no eyes. Is it under the tower? I held the dark and waited, and the answer came back the way it always did, flat and certain and impossible to argue with. Yes. Then cut the chains. I don't know how loud it came out. I don't know if my voice even shook. The chains. Cut them. Now, now, now. I heard it before I felt it. A groan of old metal letting go. The snap of links a man couldn't have bent in a forge. And then a falling. A sound so large it had weight. A sound you feel in your teeth and the soles of your feet. The bell came down out of 50 years of waiting and found the thing it had been hung to remember. The Greymore did not survive it. I won't dress that up. There was a single enormous impact, and the ground jumped, and the breathing I'd been tracking in the dark stopped. The beast that had eaten a town twice over was simply, finally, finished. Outcome and nothing more, the way these things should be told. And then, rolling out across the broken streets and the running people, and the man standing blind in the middle of it, one clear bell note. The Guardian had rung once, the only time it ever would, and it rang for the kill. Sight came back to me, the way feeling comes back to a numb hand. Wrong first, then painful, then real. Shapes, torchlight smeared into torchlight. Eve's face, far too close, gripping my shoulders, white with something that wasn't quite relief yet. I was on my knees and I hadn't noticed kneeling. Everything in me was scraped to the floor, but I could see her, and the town behind her was still standing, and the thing was dead. We had done it without a single sword that mattered. An unarmed man and a wounded knight, and a crowd of people who couldn't fight had killed what an army of brave men couldn't scratch. Not with strength, with a question asked at the right second, by someone willing to pay for the answer. Becker found me at first light, still sitting where the strength had run out of me. He looked at the dead beast, and at the fallen bell, and at the unremarkable man who'd put one on top of the other, and then he said the sentence that changed the whole shape of my life. I won't give it to you in his exact words. He was a careful man, and he chose them carefully, but the meaning was plain. I had saved a town his soldiers could not. He would not let that happen in a corner of the world where no one would ever hear of it. He meant to send my name where it belonged, to the Empire's army, with his recommendation, as a strategist who fought as though he could read the future. Eve, still gripping my shoulder like she wasn't sure I'd stay upright without it, pushed the same direction harder. She'd seen what I did and what it cost, and she had decided on the spot that the army was where a man like me ought to be, and that someone ought to go with me to make sure I lived through being that valuable. I sat in the wreckage and let myself feel it for a moment. Money hadn't made my father look up. Money couldn't throw a punch. But this was the first time the world had looked at the discarded son and seen something it needed instead of something it could throw away. Not the heir, not the sword, the mind they'd called a scam. I took the recommendation. I told myself it was a road to the only kind of power that stands on its own feet. I didn't say the other thing out loud, the thing the blindness had taught me in the dark under the tower, that the gift which had just saved a town could just as easily be the thing that one day killed me. I had felt the edge of that. I would feel it again. For now, the bell had rung, the beast was dead, and my name was about to walk into the Empire's army ahead of me. I let it. The bell had rung, the beast was dead, and my name had walked into the Empire's army ahead of me. I let it. What I had not expected was how fast the Empire would call me to answer for it. The garrison sat 2 days north of the town, an old fortress full of armed men, and the entrance exam, held just once a year, fell only days after we arrived. Eve all but dragged me there. I was still battered from the Greymore, still hollowed out from going blind on open ground, and a quiet voice in me kept asking what a man with no sword was doing in a building full of soldiers. I went anyway, for her, for the old Viscount who had vouched for me. They sat us at long benches and handed out the written test. The first section was true or false, and that section was mine. I read each line, asked Métis the question under my breath, and let the flat certainty come back. Yes, no, yes. I did not need to know why a thing was true. I only needed to know that it was. The general knowledge ran nearly as clean. But then the page turned to military strategy, pure theory, the craft of moving men across ground I had never studied, and the oracle went silent in the only way it knew. It could tell me whether a stated answer was correct. It could not hand me an answer I had never been taught to recognize. I left half of that page blank, and I felt the old gap open under me like cold water. Facts I had, judgment I would have to earn. The interview was one old woman behind a plain table, Yolanda, gray, blunt, with eyes that had spent a lifetime reading recruits and finding most of them ordinary. She read me a while in silence, and I had the strange sense of being weighed by someone who had weighed thousands. What she finally told me was not what I expected. She said I was nothing much today, an unfinished thing, a boy with no blade. But she had a feeling, she said, that I could become anything at all. It landed somewhere deep and unguarded. My whole life, one man had looked at the same gift and called it a scam, a useless thing not worth a name. Here sat a stranger who had looked for one quiet minute and seen the opposite. I did not let it show on my face. I had learned a long time ago not to let things show on my face. Then she asked the question they ask every recruit who comes from somewhere else. Where did my loyalty lie? With the homeland I was born to, or the empire I had walked into? I did not hesitate. Loyalty to the empire, I said, without a breath of hesitation. My homeland made its feelings about me very clear. She studied me a moment longer, and I thought I saw something settle in her. Not warmth, exactly, but a decision. I found Eve in the corridor, and I found trouble with her. A young noble had her cornered. golden-haired, fine-coated, the kind of man who is handed everything and learns nothing. He had taken an interest in her the way such men do, all entitlement and no manners, and when she tried to step around him, he put himself in her way again. The men at his back wore the smirk of people who had never once been told no. I came up beside her and set my hand on his arm before he could reach for her again. I did not raise my voice. There was no need. "She's a knight, and you're better," I said. "Take your hand off her." He turned on me as if a piece of the floor had spoken. Through his sneer, I caught the shape of it. "Gutter trash," he called me. "Unfit to stand in an army. A stray who had only followed a woman this far." Then his hand dropped to his blade, and his voice dropped with it, low enough that only I would hear the promise to send me somewhere I would not come back from. A flat word from the doorway stopped him. "Yolanda." The old woman did not so much as raise her chin, and the noble's hand came off his hilt as if the leather had burned him. He gathered his men and his pride and left. Yolanda told me two things, plainly, the way she told everything. The first was that I had passed. The second was who I had just made an enemy of. That golden boy was the heir of the Cranton family, and the Crantons held the strings on where every recruit in the Empire was sent. A man who crossed them did not get a quiet posting. He got buried somewhere. The burying would do itself. I asked her, straight, if she would help me. She would not. "A man who swears his own vows," she said, "answers his own troubles." And she had a feeling I had sworn a few. But she did not leave me empty-handed. In the letter she sealed for me, she named me a genius strategist and granted me command authority in my own right. A door in writing. Where it opened was no longer in her hands. Eve came away from the wall and put a hand on my arm, and her worry was doing a poor job of hiding behind her smile. She had her own news. They were posting her to a border city near the Varan kingdom. Quiet country, at peace for now. We had been thrown together by a monster and a near death, and now the army was pulling us apart before either of us had caught our breath. "If it were anyone but you," she said, "I'd be sick with worry." Her thumb pressed once against my sleeve. "But it's you. Come, if I ever need you. I mean it." I told her I would. I meant it too. Then she was gone north, and I was waiting on an envelope. The envelope came 3 days later. I broke the seal alone. The honor was written first, all formal weight and command authority, and for half a breath it almost read like a reward. Then I reached the name of the place they were sending me, and the whole thing turned over in my hands. Greymore Fortress. More than 9 in 10 who were stationed there did not last the year, so that was his answer. The Cranton heir could not strike a recommended man in the open, so he had done the clever thing, dressed a grave as a promotion, and signed it with a smile. Honor and a death sentence, sealed in the same envelope, handed to me with both seals matching. I sat with it a while. I asked Mates, quietly, whether I would die there. The answer came back the way it always did, flat, certain, impossible to argue with. No. I closed my hand around the letter the way I had once closed it around a single coin, and I decided, again, that I could turn this. They had thrown me at the worst ground in the Empire to bury me. I would build something on it instead. The carriage took 2 days, and the closer we came, the quieter the driver got. When the broken silhouette of the fortress finally rose out of the tree line, he told me, without my asking, that he would not take this posting for all the coin in the Empire. Then, he turned his horses around, the moment my boots hit the ground, and did not look back. Greymore was half a ruin. Stretches of the outer wall had fallen and never been rebuilt, the stone dark with old weather. The whole place crouched at the edge of a forest that ran on farther than the eye could follow. Behind that forest were towns. Between the towns and whatever lived under those trees stood this, too little wall, and, I would soon learn, too few men. A caretaker met me at the gate, friendly in a tired way, and remarked that he hadn't seen energy like mine walk through in a long while. Said it like a man noting a green leaf in a dead garden. He led me in past the new arrivals. 2 of them were waiting in the yard, and they were the reason, though I did not know it yet, that any of this would be worth surviving. The first was a brown-haired young man who introduced himself the way a man apologizes for existing. Dustin. He used earth magic, he said. Mostly, he thought. The hedge in his own sentence told me more than the words did. Somewhere along the way, the world had taught him that what he could do was labor, not magic, useful for moving dirt and worth nothing in a fight. He offered his hand like he half expected me to refuse it. I took it. I held the shape of him in my mind and set it aside, carefully, because something in me had already begun to want to use him. Not the way they had used him, but the right way. Then he ducked his head toward the woman beside him and asked me, low, not to mind her. She was like that with everyone, he said. She was tall, silver-haired, a face like a doll, and eyes like the back of a blade. She gave me her name and nothing else, Sharon. When I started to say a word about command, she cut clean across it. She took no orders from the incompetent and walked out of the yard without a backward glance. No anger in it, just a verdict delivered and closed. I watched her go, a swordsman who measured me and found nothing in one look. I had met that look before, across a different courtyard, from a man who shared my blood. I filed her away with Dustin, two people who had each decided, for opposite reasons, that I was not worth much. I had a habit of proving that wrong. The dining hall told me the rest. The garrison sat at long tables over cheap liquor and worn cards, faces dark and dead, men who had stopped waiting for anything but the end. When the caretaker named me their new strategist, the laughter that went around the room was not cruel so much as exhausted. A strategist, they said, sent to help them do their dying more efficiently. They were honest about the place, at least. Greymore was the army's trash can, they told me, where the Empire dumped its rebels and its failures to be ground down by the forest. Too few men, too many beasts, and a turnover that turned over because the men kept dying. They had made their peace with it. That peace was the most dangerous thing in the room. I did not argue. Arguing with despair only feeds it. I set my boot up on the table, and I let my voice go flat and very quiet. The way I had learned a quiet voice carries farther than a loud one in a room that has gone still. I told them I did not care what they thought of me. From tomorrow, on Yolanda's authority, command was mine. Disobeying me was disobeying a superior officer. And out here, with the forest at the wall, a short life only got shorter when men stopped listening to the one trying to keep them alive. The room did not cheer, but the laughter stopped. And for the first time since I'd walked through the gate, the dead faces were looking at me as if I might be something other than another body to bury. The commander was an old man with a grandfather's face, worn soft by years of writing letters home for men who never came back. Dalton. He took Yolanda's sealed letter in both hands and read it slowly. And as he read, something happened in him that I had not seen happen in a grown man before. A hope he had clearly trained himself to stop feeling came back up through his face all at once. The moment he finished, he said he had known the instant he read it that I was not meant to rot in this place. Take it, he told me. Take the fortress, take command, take all of it. His voice was not steady. If this place could ever be more than a grave, he said, then let it be mine to make so. And he was nearly weeping when he said it. An old man handing his impossible burden to a stranger because a stranger was the first hope he'd been given in years. I took it. After a life of one man refusing to see any worth in me at all, there was something I had no name for in being handed everything by a man who had only just met me. I told him no one under my command would die if I could help it. I think for the first time, I believed it as I said it. I did not sleep that night. I asked the caretaker for the library, and he led me to a low room thick with dust and forgotten lore. Shelves of it, the collected knowledge of every monster the forest had ever sent against these walls. I lit a lamp, and I read until my eyes burned. Yolanda had named me a genius. The men had named me a fraud, sent to watch them die. Somewhere between those two names was the truth, and I meant to drag myself closer to the first one by morning. A man who had gotten lucky once with a monster could not run a fortress on luck. I would learn this ground until I knew it better than the things that hunted it. And somewhere in the small hours, with the lamp low and the fortress asleep around me, I asked Matus the only question that mattered. When would the forest come? The answer came back flat and certain and without mercy, the way it always did. 3 days. 3 days. I sat with that in the dark and felt the old, cold clarity settle over me. I had a broken garrison that despised me, a timid mage who thought he was useless, a swordswoman who would sooner spit than salute, and 72 hours before something came out of those trees to test all of it, it was enough. There is a God, I have always thought, who picks a man up the moment another God throws him away. I closed the book. 3 days was enough. I only needed 3. 3 days was enough. I only needed 3. I had said that to an empty library with one lamp burning and a despising garrison asleep below me, and the words had sounded brave in the dark because no one was awake to test them. By morning, I had to make them true. So I did the only thing I have ever known how to do with a future I cannot fight. I asked. Mady answered the way it always answered. Flat. Certain. No room in it to argue. Was the attack coming from the forest? Yes. From the west? Yes. From the east as well? Yes. I went on like that, narrowing, pairing, asking the same shape of question 100 different ways until the fog had edges. Boar-type beasts, 13 of them. The third day, in the bright hours after dawn, west and east at once. Each yes cost me a little, a dull throb behind the eyes that settles in and does not leave. I pressed 2 fingers to my temple and kept asking anyway, because a number I did not trust was worth nothing, and a number I trusted with my life was worth a fortress. By the time the lamp guttered, I knew the thing that was coming better than the men who would have to face it. 13 to the hour, and not one of them awake yet believed I could know it. I found Dustin where I expected to find him, at the edge of the yard, pretending to be busy so no one would tell him he wasn't needed. He flinched when I said his name, the way a man flinches when he is used to the next word being an insult. Walk with me, I said. I took him to the western line and showed him the ground. Then I told him what I wanted. A wall here, reinforced, taller than a man, at exactly this point. A pit there, 2 strides across and twice that deep, where the slope funneled. Another wall to the east, another pit, mirrored. He stared at the dirt like I had asked him to build a cathedral out of it. Why here? The question came out small. Why these spots and not anywhere else? I could have lied. I had lied to everyone above me for years because the truth had never once been wanted. But I looked at this nervous, freckled man who had decided long before I met him that he was a failure, and I told him the truth instead. Because I know what's coming, Dustin, and I know when. My skill was something I was born with. I can know what comes, and the hour it comes. The family that raised me called it a scam. They were wrong. For a moment, he just blinked at me. Then something moved behind his eyes that I recognized because I had felt it once myself, a long time ago. The dangerous, fragile thing that happens when a discarded man is handed a reason. 13 of them, you said. His voice steadied as the work took shape in his head. That's no small attack. But you really know that? To the day? To the hour, I told him. So build me ground that knows it too. Dustin worked like a man who had never been allowed to before. He knelt and pressed his palms flat to the ground, and the soil answered. A wall rose at the western strike point, smooth and reinforced, the surface hardening toward stone, where he poured more of himself into it. Then he dug. A pit opened in the slope exactly where I had marked, deep enough that nothing charging blind would climb back out. The other able hands raised rough fences in front of the walls under my direction, channels with only one open throat, so that anything coming down the slope would have nowhere to go but the ground Dustin had hollowed. A garrison man drifted past, watching the freckled mage shape the field, and said loud enough to carry that no one alive could call a monster attack to the minute, that I was selling them dirt and calling it a plan. I let it stand. The prediction was my whole credibility now. There was nothing to argue. Either the forest came on the third day, 13 strong, west and east, or I was exactly the fraud they had named me, and dirt was all I had sold. Late in the day, Dustin sat back on his heels beside a finished pit, sweat cutting clean lines through the dust on his face, and laughed once, quietly, like the sound surprised him. It's strange, he said. Even a failure like me, I can actually be useful here. I crouched down next to him. I do not say things I do not mean. My whole life had been the cost of refusing to. So I made sure he heard that I meant this. I have an eye for people, Dustin. I always have. It's the one thing the Oracle never had to tell me. I nodded at the wall he had raised out of nothing. One day, they'll call you a great mage. Believe it, because I already do. He looked away fast and pretended it was the dust in his eyes, and I let him have that too. The third day came the way I had told them it would. The men did not believe it until the moment the tree line moved. I stood on the wall with the archers thin along it, and Sharon a little apart from everyone, sword already loose in her hand, watching the forest the way she watched me, like both might be lying to her. Below, the kill ground waited, walls and fences, and the dark mouths of the pits, all of it pointing inward like a funnel built for exactly one purpose. Then the forest broke open, west and east at once, and they came. I counted without meaning to, the number already sitting behind my teeth. 1, 3, 6, 9, 13. Squat, armored boar things, heads down, charging blind and fast the way their kind always charge, straight at the only soft-looking gap, which was the gap I had built for them. It was over almost before it began. The lead beasts hit the fences and found one open throat, and the throat poured them straight into the pits. The ground swallowed the first of them whole. The rock Dustin had loosened above the eastern wall came down on the second wave. What the terrain did not finish, the archers did. And what the archers left, Sharon stepped down to meet. Clean and economical, the wounded ones ended before they could rise. No charge ever reached the wall. No soldier ever left it. When the dust settled, there were 13 dead boars in the trap, and not one man among us so much as bleeding. The garrison went silent first, then it went loud. The kind of loud that is half disbelief and half something they had not let themselves feel in a long time on these walls. Hope. Commander Dalton came to stand beside me, his old hands gripping the stone, looking down at the impossible thing on his own ground. In all my years, he said, low, like he did not trust the words to hold, I never once saw a wall hold without a single man falling. I said nothing. I was busy being quietly, privately terrified at how close I had come to being wrong, and hiding it under the certainty they needed to see. Sharon climbed back up to the wall, flicked her blade clean, and stopped in front of me. For a long moment, she just looked, weighing me against some private standard I would never be shown. So, you weren't bluffing. It was not quite an apology. It was not quite anything. Then her eyes went back to the tree line. Humph, we'll see if it holds next time. I almost smiled, because I already knew there would be a next time, and I already knew it would not be 13. The next time arrived in my head before it arrived in the world, and it nearly took me apart. I had gone back to the library after the trap held because awe buys obedience for a week, and then men start asking what comes next, and I needed to be able to answer. So I asked Métis the wider question, not what is coming in 3 days, what is coming at all? What is the worst thing the forest is holding? The answer cost more than anything I had asked it before. By the time I had pinned it down, the size, the shape, the days, there was blood on my upper lip, and a white ringing in my ears, and a darkness at the edge of my sight that took its time clearing. I had my number. I wished I didn't. At breakfast, Dustin set a bowl in front of me and then went very still. Your face is terrible, Adrian. He said it plainly, not unkindly, the way you'd point out that a man was bleeding. What's wrong? I studied too late, that's all. The lie came out smooth. I had a lifetime of practice. There's a lot of monster lore. It doesn't read itself. He didn't argue. He just looked at me a moment longer than was comfortable, then went back to his food. I told myself he had believed me. I should have known better. I spent that day reorganizing the troop placements on Métis's quiet guidance, shifting men toward choke points for a thing none of them knew about yet. And I sent a folded note out the gate with a passing trader, bound for Nolan, because a fortress this short on weapons would need a merchant before it needed a miracle. I told no one why I moved the men. I carried the number alone, the way I had carried everything my whole life, because that was the only way I had ever been allowed to. He came that night. I heard the door before I heard him, and I did not turn around fast enough to put the certainty back on my face. So when I did turn, he had already seen it. The pail, the hollows, the hand pressed flat to the table because standing had stopped being free. Dustin stood in the doorway with the lamplight on him and did not pretend he had come for anything else. I've been beside you for months. He stepped in and shut the door. I can tell when something big is coming. Don't carry it alone, Adrian. Not this time. I should have lied again. The lie was right there. But I was tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. And he was the first person in years who had walked toward my burden instead of handing me theirs. And something in me that had been clenched shut for a very long time simply opened. So I told him. A stampede. My voice came out lower than I meant it to. 1,000 of them. A high orc leading the front. The kind that thinks, that commands the rest. 16 days from now, 200 men, not enough weapons, against 1,000 monsters with a general. He went white. I watched the number land in him, the way it had landed in me, but he didn't step back. He pulled out the chair across from mine and sat down in it, which was its own kind of answer. And then I told him the rest. The part I had never told anyone. The part the family had never once asked about. There's a cost, I said. Every time I ask it for too much, my body pays. The headaches, the blood. There are days the dark comes into my eyes and I'm afraid it won't leave. After a heavy reading, I can't always stand on my own. I made myself say the last of it, because if he was going to choose this, he should choose it with his eyes open. And I can't fight Dustin. I have no blade skill. None. I never could. The mind is all I am. When the mind breaks, there's nothing under it. For a long moment, the only sound was the lamp. Then Dustin leaned forward, and his nervous voice came out steadier than I had ever heard it. I'm not the kind of man who runs after hearing that. You should know that about me by now. His hands were shaking, and he let them. Trust your friends a little more. I'll believe in you, and I'll fight. So believe in me, and in all of us. You don't have to be the only one holding it. I had learned, very young, that the safest thing to expect from people was to be used and then set down. And here was a man the world had called useless, sitting in a cold library at midnight, refusing to let me carry something alone. I've got good friends, I said. It was all I could manage, and it was the truest thing I had said in years. I won't forget that. Sharon I told the next evening, alone, because I owed her the truth straight, and she would have despised receiving it any softer. I found her running drills against a post in the Phalanx sailing light, the way she did every evening, like the blade was the only thing in the fortress that never disappointed her. I gave her the number flat, 1,000 monsters, a high orc, 16 days. I did not dress it up. With her, dressing it up would have been the insult. She stopped mid-strike. The point of her sword dropped toward the dirt. For a few seconds, she said nothing at all, and I let the silence sit, because I had learned that her silences were where her decisions were made. 1,000 of them. She turned the words over like she was checking them for a lie and finding none. Fine, that was it. That was the whole of her terror, packed into one word and set aside. But she wasn't finished. She walked up close, closer than she ever had, and looked at me with those cold, pale eyes. And for once, there was no contempt anywhere in them. There was something harder to stand under than contempt. I want you to understand something. Her voice was low and even. I didn't follow a fortune teller. I don't care about your tricks or your hour to the minute or whatever you are. I followed you, the man who stayed when he could have run. Don't make me regret it. Then she stepped back, raised the blade, and went back to her drills as if she had said nothing at all. I stood there in the cold a moment longer than I needed to. Strangers, both of them. A timid mage and a cold swordswoman, neither owing me a thing, neither of them blood. And they were going to bleed for me on a wall, and they had decided it without my asking, for free. The way the people who shared my name never once had. I had spent my whole life trying to build something so large, the family that discarded me would have to look up at it. Standing in that yard, I understood for the first time that I had already started, and it was not made of stone, or coin, or proven predictions. It was made of the two people who had walked toward me instead of away. The next morning, I told the whole fortress. I did not soften it for them either. A stampede was coming, 1,000 strong, a high orc at the head of it, the kind that did not just charge but thought, that would press a weakness the moment it found one. 16 days, 200 of us. I named it plainly and let the room go cold with it, because men who had already half believed in me after 13 beasts needed to understand that this was not 13, and that I knew it, and that I had a plan anyway. I expected the room to break. A month earlier, it would have. A month earlier, these were drunk, dead-eyed men who had named their own fortress the army's grave and laughed at the strategists sent to share it. They did not break. They had watched a wall hold without a single man falling, and that one perfect day had done what no speech could. When I said total defense, every hand on the walls, no exceptions, 16 days to make a death trap of the whole approach. They listened like men who had decided to live. Commander Dalton rose at the back, old and slow, and let his voice carry over the rest. 200 against 1,000. He said it like a fact, not a complaint. If anyone alive can make that hold, it's the boy who already did the impossible on my wall once. The men are with you. So am I. I looked out at them, the garrison that had mocked me, the commander who had wept handing me a grave, the mage and the swordswoman standing where I could see them, and I started giving the orders that would turn 16 days into a fortress no one had believed could stand. 16 days. I have lived slower years. Dustin started at the south gate and did not stop. He hardened the walls toward stone, pouring more of himself into the earth than I think he knew he had, raising the height where Matus told me the orc would press, thickening the base where the weight of 1,000 bodies would lean. He worked until his hands shook, and then he worked past that. And when I told him to rest, he told me, with a small, fierce grin I had never seen on him before, that great mages don't rest with 16 days on the clock. I let him have the joke. He had earned the right to make it. I scheduled everything. I do not have a sword, but I have the right question. And over those days, I asked 1,000 of them. Where will the orcs send the first wave? Will the eastern wall hold the second? If I move the reserves to the south gap, do more men live? Each answer cost me a fresh trickle of blood, a white edge creeping in at the sides of my sight, an afternoon where I had to sit because the floor would not stay where I left it. I rationed myself the way I had once rationed a single coin and spent only what the wall could not hold without. And here is the thing I had never had before. When the reading dropped me, someone caught it. Dustin would appear with water and that stubborn refusal to be sent away. Sharon, who said nothing kind to anyone, took to posting herself near me on the bad days without once admitting why, her blade between me and a fortress full of men who still did not know what I was. I let them. That was its own small revolution, letting them. The high orc came on the 16th day, exactly when I had said it would, and it brought its 1,000 with it. I will not pretend I can hold the whole of it in order. It was a long, grinding day. The stampede broke on engineered ground the way water breaks on rock, funneled where Dustin had narrowed the field, dropped where he had hollowed it, met at the choke points by men who finally stood because they had been told exactly where the wave would fall and had learned to trust the telling. Sharon held the line where the orc pressed hardest and held it and held it. Dalton's men did not run. Wave after wave came against a fortress that had spent 16 days learning to be a trap, and the fortress held. The orc did not survive what we had built for it. When the last of the surge broke and scattered back into the trees, Greymore was still standing, and so were its men, more of them than anyone who knew this place would have believed possible. We stood on the wall at the end of it, the four of us, while the light went red over a field that should have been our grave. No one cheered for long. We were too tired for it, and the day had cost too much for it to feel like anything as simple as victory. But Dustin was alive, dust gray and grinning that new grin, leaning on a wall he had raised with his own hands. Sharon was alive, blade across her knees, looking out at the empty tree line with the closest thing to peace I had ever seen on her. Dalton was alive, his old eyes wet, watching the impossible become, for the second time, merely a thing that had happened. The toll sat heavy in me. My sight had not fully come back, and would not until I slept, and somewhere under the exhaustion, my body was sending me the bill for 16 days of asking. But for the first time in a very long time, I was not paying it alone. A strategist who fights as if he can read the future. That is what they started calling me after Greymore held. First from a passing trader, then a soldier, then carried back to me from places I had never been. My name began to travel ahead of me down the roads of the Empire. Not the name I was born to, the name they tore off me, but a new one, earned on a wall strangers and I had held together. I had come to Greymore to be buried in it. I left it with a fortress that stood, a legend that walked the roads without me, and two people who had chosen the discarded son for who he was and not for what he could do. The family I was born to had thrown me away for free. This one had bled for me by choice. I did not know yet that the war was about to call my new name down the road, and that when it did, it would carry me straight back toward the family that had buried the old one. For now, there was only the wall and the red light, and the three of them beside me. The first thing I had ever built that looked back. The same men who once jeered at me lined the wall the morning I left. I had come to Greymore a fraud in their eyes, a fortune teller with no sword, handed a grave and told to die in it. I was leaving it a fortress that had held. Commander Dalton stood at the gate with his old eyes wet, and when I passed him, he did not salute the recommendation that had sent me. He saluted the man. Behind him, the whole garrison came to attention. 200 faces that had watched the impossible become routine, and not one of them was laughing now. "You turned our grave into a wall," Dalton said. His voice cracked on the last word, and he let it. "Whatever they send you to next, send word if you need us. The men will come." I told him I knew. I did know. That was the strange thing I was still learning to carry, that there were people now who would come. Dustin shouldered his pack and grinned at the soldiers, like a boy leaving the first place that had ever wanted him. Sharon said nothing, which from Sharon was its own kind of farewell, her silver hair loose in the wind and one hand resting on her sword. The orders had come 3 days before. The Empire was at war on its border, and a corps called the Ashford had asked for the strategist whose name was beginning to walk the roads without him, so we walked toward it. The fourth voice did not have a body. He had arrived a week earlier, a longbow of dark wood and pale horn that someone in the Greymore armory had given up on, because the bow talked, and most men do not want a weapon that has opinions. He spoke straight into the back of my skull, dry as old paper, and he had taken one look at the way I fought, which was to say, the way I did not fight at all, and decided I was the most interesting thing to happen to him in 100 years. Randall, he called himself. A strategist who can't lift a sword, he said, somewhere behind my eyes, as the road unrolled toward the war. And a bow that aims itself. We're either going to be a legend or a very short story partner. I haven't decided which. I told him, under my breath, so the others wouldn't think I'd lost my mind, that I intended to be the legend. Bold. A pause that felt like a grin. Try not to bleed too much this time. I've heard about your last few miracles. Sharon glanced over at me, talking to the air, raised one eyebrow a fraction, and kept walking. She had already decided that whatever was wrong with me had kept her alive twice, and she could live with it. We marched for 6 days. On the 7th, we crested a low ridge, and the war was finally something I could see instead of something I had only read about, a valley full of banners. The Ashford captain did not want me. He took one look at the letter I carried, the one Yolanda had written naming me a genius, and his face did the thing all proud men's faces do when they are handed a stranger's reputation. He did not believe in letters. He believed in results. And I had none he had seen with his own eyes. So I made him a small promise. Give me 1 day of reading the field, and I would tell him the enemy's next move before the enemy made it. If I was wrong, he could send me home. He agreed because agreeing cost him nothing. Then I climbed the ridge alone to look at what we were facing, and the ground went out from under me. I knew that banner. I had grown up beneath it. A gray wolf on a field of deep red, the standard of House Rockwood, snapping in the wind on the far hill as if it had followed me across the whole world to be here. Beside it flew the white cross of the Matthias Order, the two of them allied, the two of them marching on the very corps I had just joined. And under that wolf, somewhere in that camp, were the two men who had handed me a single coin and told me to go die quietly, my father, my brother. I stood there a long time. The wind pulled at the banners on both hills, mine and theirs, and I waited to feel the rage I had carried out of that house 3 years ago. It did not come. Something colder came instead, something that had been waiting just as long, and it settled over me like a coat that finally fit. That banner on the hill, I said, to no one, to Randall, to the part of me still standing in a courtyard being told I was worthless. That's my father's. Randall waited until I was alone before he said the obvious thing. Breaking your own blood, he murmured, was a strange way to send a letter home. He did not say it cruelly. He said it the way a friend points at the thing you are pretending not to see. I sat with the lamp and the maps, and I did the arithmetic, the way I had once done it on a carriage with one coin in my palm. If I revealed myself now, I forfeited everything. The disowned heir crawling back to take revenge was a story the world had heard 1,000 times, and it ended with the heir made a target. His friends made targets, the long reckoning spent in a single loud night. But a strategist with no name, a ghost the enemy could not see and could not understand. That man could take an entire army apart, and the family would never know whose hand was at their throat until I chose to let them. I asked Métis if my father knew I lived. The answer came back the way it always did, flat and certain and impossible to argue with. No. I asked if either of them would recognize a single thing about how the Empire was about to fight. No. That was the answer I had wanted. I won't show them my face, I said quietly. I'll just show them what happens when you throw away the wrong man. Word had drifted up the road along with the war, the way word does, carried by merchants and travelers who did not know they were carrying it to me. Rockwood was fraying. My father ruled the lands now the way he had ruled his sons, by pride and by the sword. And the taxes had climbed and the peasants had soured, and the treasury that I had quietly kept full for 3 years was bleeding without me. The house was already cracking. I had not lifted a finger. All I had to do was wait and win, and let the cracks do the rest. The reckoning was mine. I would finish it on my terms, not theirs. The council looked at the numbers, and the numbers said we should lose. The coalition outnumbered the Ashford Corps more than 2 to 1. The captain's officers wanted to dig in and bleed slow and pray for reinforcements that were a month away. I stood at the map and told them we were not going to fight the enemy's swords. We were going to fight the thing that held 2 greedy armies together, which was trust, and there was not much of it to break. I had already started. Days before I ever reached the front, I had paid the same traveling merchants who carried the war's gossip to carry a particular rumor into the coalition's camp. That House Rockwood and the Empire had a quiet little arrangement, a secret pact to split the spoils of the contested mine once the Matthias Order had spent itself dying in the front rank. It was a lie. It only needed to look true, and I could make it look true with iron. From now on, I said, we hit only the Matthias army, every engagement. Let the rumor wear our armor for us. One of the officers asked why I would leave the Rockwood forces untouched when Rockwood was the larger threat. I told him because an enemy that is busy suspecting its own ally is an enemy that beats itself, and we would never have to lift a blade against the wolf if we made the wolf look like a traitor. Sharon stood at my shoulder with her arms crossed and watched the doubt move around the table. Tell me where to stand, she said when the talking was done. I'll handle the rest. That was the whole of her opinion on strategy. It was enough. Then I gave them a war that died before it was born. It worked like this. I would sit in the dark with Métis and ask the small, patient questions. Would they send cavalry first? Yes. How many? Was it 200? Yes. Was it a feint? Yes. Would the real blow come from infantry waiting in the eastern tree line? Yes. By midday tomorrow? Yes. And I would binary search the enemy's entire next day out of 2 words repeated until my head split. Then I would walk out into the morning and tell Sharon and Dustin and the Ashford officers exactly what was coming, to the road and the hour, before a single enemy soldier had moved. 200 cavalry as a feint, 200 infantry waiting in ambush. By tomorrow, midday. Dustin made the ground do the rest. Caltrops sewn across the lane the horses would take. Fields of broken stone where the map said charge. Walls raised overnight where the enemy expected open country. Walls here, broken ground there, he would say. And then he would build it, reshaping a battlefield with his hands. The cavalry came exactly where I said they would, and met fire and caltrops instead of an open field. The hidden archers in the tree line found Sharon's people already waiting in it. The Matthias order gutted in attack after attack, while the Rockwood banner sat untouched on its hill, did not survive what I had built for them. And the few who walked away from it walked away certain of one thing, that their allies had hung them out to die. I never landed a single frontal blow. I never had to. By the end of the week, the coalition was at its own throat. I did not need Matus to tell me what was happening in that camp. I had built it on purpose, and I could read it from the ridge by the way the two banners had drifted apart. The wolf and the cross, no longer side by side, but glaring across a stretch of empty ground that had not been empty a week before. The Matthias survivors had carried the rumor home soaked in their own losses, and a man bleeding will believe almost anything about the ally who let him bleed. They nearly came to blows. From across the valley, I watched my father do the only thing a veteran could do to stop two armies from killing each other before the enemy did. He split the coalition into two separate commands and pulled them apart. That was the moment I knew I had already won. They just hadn't been told yet. I heard, the way I heard everything, filtered and secondhand, that my father had begun to speak of an unnatural hand behind the Empire's moves. He was a proud man and not a stupid one, and the proud ones who survive are the ones who can smell a thing they cannot see. He told his son they were not losing to soldiers. They were losing to someone. He did not know it was the someone he had thrown out with a coin and a curse, and that not knowing was the sweetest part, sweeter than any blade I did not own. I let him wonder. Wondering, I had decided, would be the first installment of what I owed him. My brother won every fight he was in and lost every battle he stood in, and it was breaking something in him. The Sword Saint skill was real. I will give it that much. Hayden could not be beaten blade to blade by any man on that field, and he proved it again and again. Wherever the lines met and he was in them, he carved through, and once, when Sharon's archers loosed on him, he cut the arrows out of the air before they reached him. The skill that had gotten me exiled, the gift my father had built a whole new air around, worked exactly as the legends promised, and it did not matter at all, because I was not fighting Hayden's sword. I was fighting Hayden's day, and his day was already mine before he buckled it on. Every charge he led broke on ground I had chosen. Every flank he meant to turn was a flank I had already collapsed. He would win the duel in front of him and look up to find the battle around him gone, his allies routed, the field he had bled to hold suddenly worthless. He could not understand it, and Randall, watching from my back, found this endlessly amusing. The whole point of the war, he murmured, was sitting right there. The useless skill, taking the genius blade apart one wasted victory at a time. I heard that my brother had begun to rage at empty tents, that he demanded to know how every plan died before it began, that he had started to fear, in the small hours, that there was a traitor in his own command, or worse, something reading his thoughts. He was closer to the truth than my father, and just as blind. Sharon came to stand beside me on the rise, watching the Rockwood standard sag on the far hill. "You could end them," she said, not a question. She had counted the same field I had. "Tell me where to stand," she added, dry, when I didn't answer, "and I'll handle the rest." I did not give the order to finish them. I could have. By then, the coalition was two broken halves staring at each other, and one hard push would have ended the Rockwood army in the field, and the Rockwood name with it. Sharon knew it. The officers were waiting for it. Even Randall, who never asked me for anything, went quiet in a way that was its own question. I told them no. I did not want them dead. A dead enemy is a story that ends. Bone in the ground does not learn anything, does not wake at night, does not look up one day and understand. I wanted them broken where everyone could see it, and I wanted them alive to feel it, and I wanted the moment they finally learned whose hand had done this to be a moment I chose, and not an accident of some final battle. Killing them now was the easy thing, the cheap thing, the thing the frightened boy on the carriage would have wanted. I was not that boy anymore. "Not yet," I said, and Sharon studied my face in the lamplight long enough that I knew she had sensed it, that this enemy was not like the orc, not like the beasts, that there was something underneath my flatness she could not name. She did not ask. She had given up the Imperial Knights for the dream of being a true knight, one who saved people, and she followed me because she still believed I was worth following. She let it go and went to take the first watch and left me with the maps and the lamp and the wolf on the far hill that did not know it had already lost. 3 years ago, they threw me away for free. I closed my hand the way I had once closed it around a single coin, and I decided again that I could wait. For 3 years, I had been a coin somebody threw away. I had spent those years learning that the most dangerous thing a proud man can be handed is a road he thinks is his own idea. So I gave my father one. There was a path along the eastern cliffs that no sane commander would take, a narrow throat of stone where an army had to leave its horses behind and crawl single file along the drop. 2 days of climbing for men in armor. A few of them would not make it across the worst gaps. Everyone who studied that route would tell you the same thing. Only a fool or a desperate man would lead a host down it. I made certain my father believed he had discovered it himself. I lay flat on the ledge above the canyon and watched the gray wolf banner come crawling along the rock far below, smaller than a thumbnail at this distance, and I felt nothing I would have called joy. Just a cold, drained quiet, the kind that settles after you have asked a question you already knew the answer to. They think the hard road is their secret, I said. A dry voice answered inside my skull, the way it always did now. Randall found the whole thing very funny and did not bother to hide it. He pointed out, telepathically, that there was something almost poetic about a genius blade marching 2 days uphill to stand exactly where a man with no sword wanted it to stand. It's mine, I told him. The road is mine. They just don't know it yet. I asked Matus the only question that mattered. Would they reach the clearing by midday? The answer came back flat and certain, the way it always came, with no how and no why attached to it, just the bare shape of what was true. Yes. I closed my eyes against the small splitting ache behind them and let the canyon fill with quiet again. By midday, the clearing below me was full of my family's army. It was a bowl of bare ground walled in by stone on every side, and it looked, to the men filing into it, like the safest place in the world. They had crawled the cliff road for 2 days, and no one had loosed an arrow at them. My brother had done everything a careful commander should. He had posted scouts along both cliff edges with orders to report anything that moved, and the scouts had reported nothing because I had given them nothing to see. Dustin's work was already inside the walls, sealed behind the rock, sleeping. My father stopped in the center of that bowl and let his men rest. I did not need the oracle to read him from there. A lifetime of pride does not announce itself. It relaxes. Weapons came down. Shoulders dropped. He was certain in that moment that no enemy alive could have guessed this route, and that certainty was the last thing I had built for him, brick by brick, over weeks. Behind me, Dustin pressed both palms flat to the warm stone and waited. He was not the timid man I had met at Greymore anymore. The walls are ready. He didn't look up from the rock. Say when. Sharon crouched at the lip of the descent with the Ashford line coiled behind her, her sword already drawn, her silver hair flat against her cheek in the still air. She did not know whose army she was about to break. She only knew where I had told her to stand. I watched my father set down his guard in the middle of my killing ground, and I let the silence stretch one breath longer than it needed to. Now, I said. Dustin's hands closed. The cliff walls came apart. What had looked like solid stone folded outward all at once. Dustin's prepared positions breaking open along every face of the bowl, and the Ashford cores poured down through the gaps before the dust had finished rising. Sharon went first. All of you, with me, she called, and the line broke down the slope behind her like water finding a crack. An army of swords is a terrible thing on open ground. An army of swords packed into a stone bowl, weapons down, surrounded in a single heartbeat, is not an army at all. It is a crowd. I had not beaten my father's soldiers. I had simply arranged for them to be standing in the wrong place at the one moment they could not afford it. I stayed where I was, flat on the heights, a face no one down there would ever see. There, I lifted the bow. Both of them, before they rallied the line. Randall was already with me, grimly delighted, threading his certainty into the shot. He told me to trust the loose and let him do the rest, that we would clip those two and let the others run. I drew on a man I had not stood near in 3 years, on the wolf crest at the center of the bowl, and on the golden figure beside him, whose blade had never lost a duel in its life. I loosed twice, a bow that cannot lift a sword, guided by a man who has no martial skill at all, and the arrows bent in the air the way no honest arrow does, and found the 2 places that ended the fight. My brother's sword arm, my father's leg, and then his arm, not their lives. I had been very specific about that with myself long before this morning. The 2 pillars of House Rockwood went down in the dust, and the host that had crawled a cliff for the privilege of standing here went down with them. After that, it was not a battle. It was an unmaking. A host that loses both its commanders in the same breath does not fight on. It tries to live. The Rockwood line came apart into 1,000 men all deciding at once that the day was lost, and they were right. Below me, surviving subordinates threw themselves around the 2 fallen leaders, hauled them up, and dragged them toward the one mouth of the canyon I had deliberately left open. I let them go. I could have closed that gap. Dustin could have sealed it with a thought, and I could have ended the oldest debt I carried in a single afternoon, here, where no one would ever have known my hand was in it. I had asked myself the question on the carriage out, weeks ago, and I had given myself the answer that morning on the ledge. Dead men feel nothing. Dead men are mourned, and then they are forgotten, and the forgetting is its own mercy. I did not want to grant my family mercy. I wanted them alive. My father was dragged off his own battlefield, cursing an enemy he could not see. I heard the shape of it carried up on the wind, the disbelief, the blame flung at everyone but himself, the word impossible repeated like a man arguing with a wall. He had spent his whole life certain the world bent to the sword. He left that clearing the first day it didn't, and he still had no idea who had bent it. My brother ran, the sword saint, the blade that cut arrows from the air, ran like a boy from a dark room, certain now that some unseen mind was riding with the enemy, that man, whoever he imagined that man to be, was somewhere out there reading him. He could not name what he was fleeing. That was the point. He had ordered knights to murder me on a road 3 years ago and forgotten my face by the next morning. And now he would spend the rest of this war fleeing a ghost he could not even picture. Randall, quiet for once, said only that it was a strange way to come home, winning by refusing to finish it. Let them run, I said. They'll spend the rest of this war wondering who did it. I lowered the bow and watched the last of the wolf banners stagger out through the open mouth of the canyon. So will everyone else. The story left the field faster than the survivors did. By the time we came down off the cliffs, it was already running ahead of us, growing as it ran. House Rockwood, a name that had held its standing on the strength of its blades across 2 realms, had been shattered in a single morning by a nameless imperial strategist. They said he fought like a prophet. They said he had read the enemy's every step before it was taken. They did not say his name because not one man on that field had ever learned it. I sat in the command tent that night and listened to my own legend arrive without me in it. There is a particular kind of cold that comes from hearing 1,000 mouths describe the most important thing you have ever done and get the one detail that matters wrong. They had the ghost. They did not have the man. Sharon dropped onto the stool across the map table, still in her armor, and studied me the way she had taken to doing lately, like there was a word for what she was looking at and she hadn't found it. You won, she said. You don't look like a man who won. I didn't answer that. Some questions you let pass. Dustin filled the quiet instead, the way he always did, talking through what the walls had done, how the positions had held, pride creeping into a voice that used to apologize for existing. He had built a thing only he could build, and it had broken an army, and he knew it. I let him have it. He had earned every word, and underneath all of it, the truth I would not say to either of them, that the men we had broken today were my blood, and that I had held a knife at the throat of the whole long debt, and chosen, on purpose, not to cut it. Not yet. A wound that pays a single coin and saves the rest. Sharon watched me too long, found nothing she could put a name to, and let it go again. A breaker of armies does not get to stay a ghost forever. Some weeks later, a summons came down the chain with the imperial seal on it, and the front let me go to answer it. The capital of the Aldon Empire was a city built out of white stone, and it was bigger than anything I had ever stood inside, in this life or the one I had been thrown out of. As a noble's son, I had thought I understood what a great house looked like. I had not. The palace ahead of us could have swallowed my father's whole estate and not noticed the meal. Randall, riding at my shoulder, observed in that dry, private voice that the burden who got handed a single coin and shown the gate was now being called to kneel before an emperor, and that he, personally, found the arithmetic of it deeply satisfying. Dustin, walking beside me, had gone quiet and watchful. He knew this city better than I expected. He started naming the powers of it under his breath, the houses that sat almost as high as the throne itself. 2 of them sit close enough to the throne that it barely matters which side the crown is on. He kept his voice low, even on an open road. Cross either, and a man can just stop existing. One of them is Barnaby's. I asked him which nobles a man like me must never offend. Sharon answered before he could, blunt as a dropped stone. An audience with the emperor is impossible for a commoner. You're worrying about which fork to use at a table you were never supposed to sit at. A pause, and something almost gentle under the iron. If it were me, I'd hate every second of it. Just be glad. I filed the name away. Barnaby. I did not know yet that I had just been handed the only thing in this whole story that the oracle would not be able to read. They called me in alone. The audience chamber was a long hall of polished marble with rows of old nobles standing to either side, and a throne at the end of it that had been built to make a man feel small the moment he walked through the doors. It worked. I had knelt before my father 100 times as a boy. I had never knelt before anything like this. The emperor sat at the far end of it, somewhere near 50, sharp-eyed, the kind of man whose graciousness is a test you are already failing if you relax. I never thought in either life that I would actually kneel before an emperor. I knelt. He did not begin with me. First, he called forward a young man, a favored heir of one of the great houses, golden and certain, the sort of face that has never once wondered whether it belonged in a room. The emperor raised him to a high knight command, and the hall answered with warm, eager applause, the sound rolling up from 100 throats that knew exactly whose son they were clapping for. Then he turned to me. He named the things I had done, the fortress in the north that should have fallen and did not, the coalition that should have won and didn't, and he granted me a knight's peerage and told me to keep working. The applause for me was thin. I knelt there in the silence between the few claps and read the whole room off it, the way you read a ledger. Connection had just been celebrated. Merit had just been tolerated. The powdered faces along the marble were not looking at a hero. They were looking at an unattached commoner who had risen without owing any of them a thing. And that, I understood, was the one unforgivable crime in a place like this. An honor, Your Majesty, I said. I meant it, and I watched them not believe a man like me could. The emperor was not finished with me. He asked before the whole court whether I wished to transfer into the elite imperial knight order, to leave the northern border and step up into the body that guarded the throne itself. It was an enormous thing to be offered. It was also, I realized in the same breath, a door someone in that room did not want me to walk through. Because before I could answer, a voice cut across the hall, a single cold phrase, asking the emperor for a moment. It was not loud. It did not need to be. It came from a white-haired nobleman standing among the eldest of them, a man near 50, with a face as blank and untroubled as a machine, and the whole chamber shifted toward him the way iron filings shift toward a magnet you couldn't see until it moved. The applause, the throne, the favored heir, all of it had been the surface of the water. This was the thing underneath. I never learned, in that hall, exactly who he was. I only felt the temperature of the room change around him, and I heard the name that the resentful old houses kept murmuring to one another when they thought a commoner wasn't listening to anything but his own good fortune. Barnaby. I had spent 3 years climbing out of a single throne coin, and I had told myself the whole way up that I wanted to build something so large the family that discarded me would have to look up at it. I was learning, in that cold marble hall, the price of the climb. The higher you go, the larger the things that start hunting you. I had broken every enemy a sword could put in front of me. I had just walked into a room full of the ones a sword can't touch. I came out of that hall a knight of the empire and a target of it in the same hour. And the first friendly face I saw was one I hadn't seen since the early days. Eve was waiting in the colonnade, in the polished silver of an imperial order, her golden hair tied back the way it always was, watching me come through the great doors with the particular look of someone who called a thing years ago and has been waiting to be proven right. I knew you'd end up somewhere like this. She fell into step beside me without asking permission, the way old allies do. Took you long enough, it was a small thing. It steadied me more than the peerage had. The found family that had come up the long road with me. Dustin's hands, Sharon's blade, Randall's dry voice, and now Eve's foothold in the one city that mattered. That was the part of all this I would not trade. The blood family I had broken on a cliff. This one I had chosen, and it had chosen me back. I looked out over the white stone capital from the colonnade and let myself feel, for one breath, how far the coin had carried me. Then I thought about a blank machine face, and a name the old houses murmured like a warning, and the breath went cold in my chest. My father did not know my name yet. The Empire did not know my name yet. But somewhere in this white city, a man I had not met had just looked up from his board, marked the upstart who had ended his profitable little war, and started to move. I had spent 3 years being the one who saw the enemy first. For the first time, I had the feeling I was the one being read. The summons came 3 days after the Emperor laid a knight's peerage on my shoulders, and it did not come from the Emperor. It came folded inside an envelope so fine I could feel the weight of the man before I broke the seal. The hand was gentle, the words were warm, and reading them was like running my palm along the flat of a knife. A great house wished to welcome the Empire's new hero to a quiet lunch. That was all. That was everything. In the capital, they called Duke Barnaby the conscience of the Empire. Eve had told me the other name in a lower voice, in the colonnade, watching the arches as if they might lean in to listen. The lord of everything that happened in the dark. 2 truths in one old man, and I had been invited to lunch by both of them. The drive went on longer than some towns I had walked through. White stone, clipped hedges, fountains that ran with nothing to celebrate. By the door, an old butler waited with his hands folded, formal as a closed ledger, and he asked with great courtesy that I leave any weapon at the threshold. I almost laughed. I had no weapon. I had never carried one in my life. Then this will be simple, I said, and let him lead me in. I asked Metis a small thing as the doors swung shut behind me. Was the Duke's strongest enforcer, the old top-rank killer he kept at his side, inside these walls today? The answer came flat and instant and certain, the way it always came. No, the man was away. I filed it the way I file everything, and I followed the butler down a hall hung with the portraits of people who had stopped existing. He rose to meet me, like a grandfather greeting a child he was fond of. Around 50, lean and elegant, with dark hair combed back and gone silver at the edges. His eyes were a pale gray that did not change no matter what the rest of his face did, and his face did a great deal. It smiled, it softened, it crinkled with warmth, and behind all of it, the gray stayed flat and still as standing water. He poured the coffee himself. He praised the hero who had ended a war the Empire had been bleeding into for years. I deflected it the way you deflect a blade you cannot block. It was luck, I told him. It was better people standing beside me than a man like me deserved. He liked that answer. He liked it too much, the way a buyer likes a price that is lower than the thing is worth. Then he called my new standing a gift. That was the word that told me everything. A gift is a thing one person chooses to hand to another, and for there to be room in the court for a no-name commoner with a knight's peerage, men above me had to be moved out of the way. I set the cup down. So, the standing is a gift, I said, which means you decided who had to die to make this space. The warmth did not crack. It deepened. He told me, kindly, that we were past pretending, that we both already knew who truly held the threads of the Empire when the throne room emptied. He was not confessing. He was measuring, turning me in the light to see how much I had already guessed, the way a man weighs a coin he is thinking of spending. I let him see all of it. I met the gray square on and let nothing in my face soften. You mean the man who runs everything under the Empire in the dark. I know exactly what you are, and no, I won't be your tool. For a moment, the gray came all the way to the surface, and the grandfather was gone, and what was left looked at me with the patience of someone who had buried cleverer men than me in that hall of portraits. He did not raise his voice. He never would. He let the silence do the work, the silence that said a duke could strip a commoner's rank with a sentence, and his life with a little more. I did not wait for the sentence. I stood, thanked him for the coffee, as if it were the only honest thing between us, and walked toward the door while his guards were still reading his face for an order that, this once, had not yet been decided. I got out clean. I knew I would. I had asked the only question that mattered before I ever stepped inside, and the answer had been no. The enforcer was away, the hour was mine. A fixed thing, a thing already decided. Métis reads, decided things the way I read large print. So in the carriage, with the white walls shrinking behind me, I asked the next one. Would Barnaby move to have me killed within the week? And nothing came back. Not yes, not no. Not the flat certainty I had leaned on since I was a boy with one coin in his fist, on a different road in a different kingdom. A blank. A gray nothing where the answer had always lived. Like reaching for a step in the dark and finding the stair simply gone. I asked it again, smaller. Had he already decided to kill me? Fog. Would he send men tonight? Fog. I sat very still and understood, slowly, the shape of the thing I had just walked out of. He had not failed to decide. He was a man who had spent a lifetime learning never to decide anything until the last possible breath, to move by decoys and second guesses and the throw of his own private dice, so that any eye watching the future would find only weather. Monsters charge in straight lines. Armies march to a plan. I had beaten all of them because the world, in the end, commits to a path, and Métis reads paths. Barnaby had built himself into the one thing that never committed, the first enemy I had ever met that my gift could not see, and he already knew exactly what my gift was. Sharon heard the whole of it standing, arms crossed, getting harder around the mouth with every sentence. You threw it in a duke's face and walked out. She did not phrase it as a question. Are you actively trying to die? Maybe a little. That was not what slowed her. What slowed her came after, when I told her flat that I had asked Métis what the man would do next and gotten nothing. Her arms came uncrossed. Wait! She crossed the room, and the dry edge fell out of her voice. "You're telling me your skill went quiet. The answers just stopped." I had never had to explain the silence before, because it had never happened where it counted. I told her the truth. Against everything else in the world, the Oracle is a wall I can lean my whole weight on. Against a man who refuses to choose until the last instant, who keeps his own mind fogged on purpose, it leans back into empty air. She was quiet for a long moment. I watched her arrive at the place I had already reached, the cold place, and I watched it land harder on her than it had on me, because she had spent months believing nothing could touch a man who always knew. "Then we stop relying on the answers," she said at last, and her hand had drifted, without her noticing, to the hilt at her hip. "If your skill can't see him, fine. We make him bleed our way instead." It was the most comforting thing anyone had said to me in days. It was also a confession from both of us that the thing that had kept me alive since the exile road had just been taken off the board. The killing started within the week, the way the fog had refused to promise, and the way I had known anyway. Not at me, around me. A clerk who had handled my accounts, found dead with no mark anyone could explain. A guard who walked me to the gate, simply gone. Dustin traced the thread for 2 nights, hunched over the table with his maps and his careful, nervous hands, and what it led back to was almost an insult. A general store, a plain one, shelves of rope and lamp oil and saltfish, tucked in the slums of Bellwater where the lamps gave out. "That's the front," Dustin said, and tapped the spot like it might bite. "Buy nothing, sell nothing that matters. All the money comes in the back door. It's a guild, killers. They've ended hundreds, and nobody ever bought a thing in the shop. A guild of assassins behind a counter of salt fish. I almost admired it. There was a name under the name too, a chief who ran the shelves and the blades both. The kind of patient professional who sends his lesser knives first and keeps the best ones sheathed. Word came back to me in pieces. Never a face, only the shape of a man who would not bother coming himself until everyone he sent had failed. I did not have to meet him to understand him. Barnaby had bought a weapon built for exactly one job, killing a man who could see the future, and he had handed it my address. Sharon read it off my face before I said it. "Your skill," she said. "It won't work on them either. It'll tell me danger is near." I looked at the little marked square in the slums. "It won't tell me which door, which hand, which breath. They'll flip a coin in their own heads, and even the coin will be hidden from me." They did not knock. They walked in with everyone else. My house was never empty. Officials, petitioners, men with grievances, and men with paper. A tide of strangers moving through the receiving hall from the moment the doors opened. That was the point of it. One more face in plain clothes, hat in his hands, eyes down, waiting his turn with a complaint about a property line. Nothing about him moved wrong. I looked straight at him, and Matus gave me nothing, because the man himself had not yet decided when he would move, and a thing not yet decided cannot be read. Sharon did not need the oracle. She stepped off the wall before I understood why, crossed in front of me, and her blade was out before the petitioner's hat hit the floor and the short knife came up out of it. "Stay behind me," she said, not loud, not afraid. "And stop thinking for one breath." Steel met steel a hand's width from my chest. She turned the strike, drove him back, and put herself between the doorway and me in the same motion. The man had no face I would remember, and no name I would ever learn. He had a smile he had practiced, and it had not fooled her for a heartbeat. Her chest still heaved as she held the line. I did not need a prophecy to know that smile was fake. The first one was the door they wanted me to watch. The rest came over the courtyard wall while I was watching it. 3 of them, maybe 4. I never got a clean count, because every time I reached for Métis to fix one in place, the answer crumbled the instant I touched it. Where does the next blade come from? Fog. Left or right? Fog. They had trained their own choosing into noise on purpose, and my whole life's weapon closed its eyes in my hands at the one moment I had ever truly needed it. So I did the only thing a man with no sword and no sight can do. I asked the question I could answer, not where will the blade be, where can the blade not reach? And I shouted the only safe corner of that courtyard a half breath before I had finished working it out. Dustin was already moving. The ground answered him like it always did, and a wall of raw stone tore up out of the flagstones between me and the men coming on. "Wall is up. Get him behind it." His voice cracked on it, high and scared, and he did it anyway. "I am not the useless one anymore. Move!" It split them, the way he meant it to. It bought breaths. It did not buy enough. One came around the end of the new wall while I was blind to him, and I felt the air of the strike before I knew it was there. And then Sharon was in the line of it instead of me, and she took the cut meant for my throat across her arm and did not make a sound. Dustin took one too, dragging me out of a path I had not seen closing, both of them bleeding, neither of them stopping. I overreached then. I asked Matus too much, too fast, hunting one clean answer in all that fog. and my body paid it the way it always pays. The hot copper rush at the back of my throat, the room tilting, blood at my nose, and the world going thin at the edges. I had no power left and no blade to fall back on, and the only reason the next strike never landed was that Sharon was standing in front of me with red running down her sleeve, refusing to fall. "We bleed for him," she said to the man on the other side of her sword, almost gently. "That is the difference between you and us." What was left of the wave broke against the two of them and pulled back over the wall the way it had come, choosing, even in retreat, by a coin I would never get to see. I sat down on the broken flagstones because my legs were done arguing about it. Dustin was binding Sharon's arm with a strip torn off his own robe, both of them gray-faced, neither of them looking at the wound. The general store would open tomorrow and sell salt fish to no one, and the chief behind its counter would hear that his lesser knives had failed and simply file it, patient, certain. He had spent the cheap men first. There would be a deadlier one when these ran out. I knew that the way I used to know everything. For years, the Oracle had made me untouchable. Monsters, armies, my own blood on a cliffside. Every one of them had committed to a path, and I had read the path and won. I had started to believe the answer would always be there. Today, the answer had gone quiet at the exact moment a knife came for my throat, and the only thing between me and the dark had been two people bleeding on purpose. I looked at the two of them, and I understood the rule that would have to carry the rest of this. "I stopped guessing," I said. My voice came out thin and certain at once. "I can't outsee a man who won't decide. So I stopped trying to read his choices, and I build a room where every door he opens is the wrong one. People, walls, traps that don't care which way the coin lands." Sharon almost smiled through the gray. Dustin tied off the bandage and said, quiet, that I had taught him where to stand, and that he intended to keep standing there. I had walked out of a duke's house alive and called it a victory. Sitting in my own broken courtyard with my friend's blood on the stones, I finally understood what I had actually walked out into. 3 years ago, a proud man threw me away with a single coin and thought that was the end of me. He never frightened me. This one did. A man I could not read, who already knew exactly how to read me, and who had only just started to spend. While I built a war in the capital, 1,000 miles to the west, the house that threw me away was coming down. I was not there to watch it fall. I did not need to be. I had run that estate for 3 years, quietly, invisibly, and I knew the shape of it the way you know the sound of your own name. Eve's reports filled in the rest. The treasury was empty, not low, empty. For 3 years, a careful hand had kept the ledgers honest and the revenue climbing, almost half again what it had been when I left, all of it earned by the son nobody thanked. They drove that hand out the gate with 1 coin, and within a few seasons, the numbers began to bleed. Misrule does not announce itself. It just adds quietly until the sum arrives all at once. And it had arrived. The army my brother marched out to glory with had come home a tenth of itself. The rest left in imperial mud. The household guard was a rumor of what it had been. The peasants who once paid their taxes and held their tongues now stood at the manor walls with their grievances out loud, because a house that cannot feed its own cannot frighten anyone. My father walked the long hall the way a man walks a battlefield after the battle is lost. The crimson coat had gone thin at the elbows. He had always equated worth with the sword, and the sword had not saved a single coin of any of it. Sebastian followed 2 steps behind him, the way he had followed for 40 years. The old steward said nothing for a long while. Then, quietly, to no one, he said the thing he had carried since the morning they put me on that road. "I feared this," he said, "from the day we drove the young master out." My father did not turn around, but his shoulders heard it. My brother had a room full of trophies and nothing left to feel about them. He had awakened the sword saint's skill once, the rarest blade in 3 generations, and the whole kingdom had bent to look at him. He had never lost a duel, not one. He told the empty room as much, over and over, as if the empty room owed him an argument, that his blade had never been beaten, that no man had ever crossed steel with him and walked away the winner. And still, he had lost everything. That was the part his mind could not hold. Some ghost on the other side of the war had read every move before he made it, had folded his charges back on themselves, had emptied his ranks without ever giving him a throat to cut. You cannot win a duel against a man who never shows up to fight one. His legendary sword, the thing that made him a Rockwood worth the name, had become a beautiful object that decided nothing. He raged at the walls. He had no enemy he could reach, so he made one of the furniture. And underneath the rage, where he would not look, sat a smaller, colder thing, a dread with no name yet, a suspicion he could not afford to finish, that the ghost who unmade him fought the way only one mind mind he had ever known could fight. The mind he had ordered killed on a road years ago for the crime of being cleverer than a sword. He did not finish the thought. Men like my brother never do, until it is far too late to matter. It came to a head in the study, the room where the decision to exile me had been made in the time it takes to flip a coin. My father had run out of moves, creditors at the door, rival houses sharpening their offers, and worst of all, a faction from across the border, patient, well-funded, moving on the carcass of the house with the calm of men who already owned it. He did not know whose purse those men answered to. I did. They answered to the same duke who was, at that very hour, trying to have me killed. He had no army to drive them off and no gold to buy them off. He had, in the end, only one thing left to reach for, and it was the thing his pride had spent years refusing to name. He said it the way a man pulls a splinter, all at once, because slow would be worse. He had called my skill a scam. He had thrown his most capable son out the gate for the price of a loaf of bread. And look, he said, look at what the house had become in the empty place where that son used to stand. Find the boy, whatever it costs, whatever road it takes, bring him home. If anyone alive could pull the Rockwoods out of the grave they had dug, it was the one he should never have buried. My brother, hollow in the corner, did not fight it. He told them to bring the coward back if they had to. Anything was better than this. He said the word coward the way a man says a prayer he has stopped believing. Sebastian stood by the door and let the silence answer for him. Years ago, he had pressed 10 coins of his own into my hand on that road, the only mercy in the whole affair. And he had believed in me when no one with the Rockwood name would. Now, he watched the name learn what it had thrown away. A house that throws away its foundation, he said softly, should not be shocked when the walls come down. Then he turned to the window, and a different prayer crossed his face. Wherever the young master was now, he hoped he was far from this, safe, beyond their reach. He had no idea how close and how far the truth already was. None of them did. The son they wanted to drag home was the ghost who had broken them, wearing a name they had never heard, hunted by the same duke now circling their walls. They were not looking for their salvation and their ruin in two different directions. They were the same man, and he was not coming home to be used. 1,000 miles east, in a room that smelled of lamp oil and old paper, I was learning how to fight a man I could not see coming. That was the whole problem, laid bare. Every enemy I had ever beaten committed to something, and a committed choice was a choice Métis could read, and reading it, I could be there first. But the Duke had stopped choosing. He moved by coin flip and decoy, kept his own mind deliberately undecided, and so every question I asked about him came back as fog. Not yes, not no, nothing. You cannot outguess a coin. I had spent a week trying, and a week is a long time to be wrong. So I stopped. I laid both hands flat on the map and told the 3 people I trusted that we were done predicting him. I can't tell you what he'll choose. The words came out quiet, certain. I could make every choice the wrong one. Sharon folded her arms and waited for the part that made sense. So I gave it to her. You cannot foresee a coin flip, but you can build the board the coin lands on, shape every alley, seal every exit, arrange the pieces so that heads loses and tails loses, and there is no third face. The Duke could randomize all he liked inside a room where every door opened onto a wall. Dustin understood before I finished. The walls were his whole gift. Tell me where you want them, he said, already leaning over the map, and I'll give him nowhere to run. And there was a second blade, sharper than terrain. His network ran on bought loyalty, killers and informers and slum families. All of them paid, none of them faithful. A purse holds a man only until a heavier purse walks by. Buy his men, I said, not his secrets. Loyalty for sale reads the same in any language. Turn the informers. Feed the guild false certainties through its own mouths. Make betrayal safer than loyalty. And the web starts reporting to me. Eve had been quiet by the door, arms crossed over the gold filigree of her imperial breastplate, watching me the way she did when she had already decided to follow and was only waiting for the door to open. Whatever you're planning, she said, I'm in it. The machine, once built, ran in the dark. I did not lead the raids. I could not. I had no sword, and the place a strategist belongs is bent over a map with the threads in his hands. So my people went into the Bellwater slums and pulled the Duke's guild apart one house at a time. It worked the way I promised it would. Dustin shaped each street before they entered it, raised a wall here, collapsed an exit there, until the killers who lived by being unpredictable found that their choices had all been made for them. Run left, a a wall, run right, a dead end, stand and fight Sharon. There was no fourth option, and a coin with 3 blank faces is not a weapon anymore. The informers turned exactly on schedule. The ones who would not sell their loyalty discovered, gently, that someone had let it slip they already had, and a guild that decides each move on a coin flip cannot tell a true traitor from a planted one. Suspicion did the rest. Their own network began to eat itself, and the false certainties I fed it sent their best knives chasing shapes I had drawn for them. It cost us. Of course it cost us. They took 3 safe houses in one night, and the third one fought back hard. Sharon came home with a fresh binding around her sword arm and ice in her eyes, and she counted it cheap. "We took 3 of their houses tonight," she said, before I could ask after the arm. "Their certainty is gone." Dustin took a cut across the brow, holding a collapsing wall a heartbeat longer than it wanted to stand. He wiped the blood, looked at it like it belonged to someone else, and reported in. "Every alley closes where you say it closes." A breath. "I'm still standing. Use me." I used them. God help me. I used everyone, because the only thing I would not spend was the only thing I had no right to keep. Every trap had to be verified before I sprang it, and verifying meant reading the fog the deep way. That was where the bill came due. A shallow question costs a headache. A deep reading, the kind that drags a real answer up out of a mind that does not want to be read, costs something I was running out of. By the 3rd night, my nosebleeds did not stop on their own. By the 5th, the lamp on the table swam at the edges and would not hold still, and twice the room went dark for a slow count of 10 before the light crawled back. I had a question I had been afraid to ask, so naturally I asked it. I asked Madius whether I would still have my sight in a week if I read the fog the deep way one more time. The answer was yes. Flat, certain, the way it always came. I let myself breathe. Then I asked whether I would still have it if I did that 3 more times. And the answer was no. There it was, the whole price tag in 2 clean words. I could keep paying with my eyes, and the eyes had a bottom to them, and I could see the bottom now. I reached for the next report anyway. Sharon's hand came down flat on the page before mine could. "You keep paying with your eyes." Her voice had lost all its edges, which was worse than the edges. "Stop. Let me pay with my sword." I told her it did not work like that the sword could not read a coin in the dark, that this was the one wall only I could hold. She did not move her hand. "Read it later." She leaned in until I had nowhere to look but her. "Sleep now, or I carry you to bed myself, and I will not be gentle about it." Dustin stood behind her, dust gray and swaying on his own feet, and did not say a word because the 2 of them had already decided and were only letting me catch up. I slept 4 hours. It is the only retreat in this whole story I am not ashamed of. Eve found the thread that turned 4 separate fights into one. She came in at first light with a single page held the way you hold something that bites. The turned informers had given us the Duke's account books in pieces, and one of those pieces did not belong in the capital at all. It listed payments going west, across the border, to a faction of patient men moving on a broken house in the Varan kingdom. She set the page down in front of my failing eyes and said the words plainly. "The men eating that broken house?" She tapped the line. "They answer to the same purse as your Duke." I read it 3 times to be sure, and the room went very quiet, and not from the toll. I had been fighting 2 wars, the Duke who wanted me erased, and the slow, cold collapse of the family that erased me first. I had let myself believe they were 2 stories that happened to share a narrator. They were not. The same hand reaching for my throat in the capital was reaching, at the same hour, for the throat of the house that threw me away. Barnaby did not know the strategist he was hunting, and the heir he was about to swallow were the same man. Neither did the heir's father, on his knees 1,000 miles west, sending men out to find a son he would never recognize. But I knew. For the first time, I held both ends of it. Eve watched me find it. She always saw the personal stake under the strategy, even when I would not name it. She did not ask. She only said she could keep the capital looking the other way a little longer, and whatever I was building, she was in it. I did not answer right away. I sat in the gray light with the toll humming behind my eyes, and 4 open wounds bleeding at once. The debt my family owed me, the Duke I could not read, the name I had not yet shown to anyone, and the people in the next room who kept getting cut to keep me whole. Every one of them live, every one of them hot, not a single thread idle, and now a 5th thing, quieter than all of them, and heavier than any. The 2 great wars were one war. The family's ruin and the Duke's hunt were the same coin, and I was learning to be the kind of man who could flip it. They had thrown me out for a single coin once. I was going to make sure the last one landed where I chose, but not yet. The house in the west was still looking the wrong way, still calling a name into the dark, still certain its salvation was a son it could drag home and use. It had not reached me. It did not know me. It would before the end, just not yet. I picked up the next report. My eyes held. For now, they held. For 3 years, I had carried one coin in my mind the way a man carries a stone in his shoe. They gave it to me at the gate and called it preparation money. They told me it was generous. I had done the arithmetic on the carriage out, and the arithmetic had never once stopped running since. A coin like that bought a week of bread if you were careful. It did not buy a man back his name. That morning, the coin came due, and it came on paper. Eve set the petition on the map table without a word, which was how I knew it mattered. She was good at reading my face, better than most, and she had learned to spare me the announcement when the announcement would land like a blow. The seal was a wolf, gray wax, pressed crooked, the way a thing is pressed by a hand that is no longer sure of itself. I did not need to break it. I had known the shape of this for a week, since the night the account books proved that the men devouring my father's lands and the men hunting me answered to the same purse. 2 wars, 1 coin. I had been waiting to see which way it would land. They crossed the border 4 days ago, Eve said. She kept her voice level, the way you keep your voice level near something that might go off. House Rockwood, what's left of it. The Duke's faction took the last of their grain stores, and there's nowhere left in the kingdom that will shelter a house with creditors at the gate and a banner everyone's already counted as dead. So they had run across the border into the empire to the one power large enough to stand between a dying house and Duke Barnaby, the famous strategist, the ghost who broke armies, the man whose name the whole capital spoke and whose face almost no one had seen. They had come to beg the only stranger powerful enough to save them. They did not know they had walked the length of a kingdom to kneel to their own son. My father signed this, I said. I turned the page so the wolf caught the gray light. In his own hand, he's asking me to hear his petition. Eve watched me the way you watch a frozen river in spring, listening for the crack. Whatever she saw in my face, it was not what she had braced for. And what do I tell the gate? I thought about the boy on the carriage with the stone in his shoe. I thought about how long a week of bread lasts when you make it last. Tell the Lord of Rockwood, I said, that I will hear him. There is a particular quiet a room makes before it breaks a man. I had felt it once from the wrong side, on a morning years ago, standing in a hall very like this one, while a viscount with a wolf on his coat decided I was a burden and a single coin was a fair price to be rid of me. I had promised myself on the carriage out that I would never stand in the small place of that quiet again. I sat in the high seat now. The quiet was mine. They brought my father in, and I made myself look at him slowly, the way you make yourself look at a wound to be sure of its size. The coat was the same crimson he had always worn, but the gold thread had gone to tarnish, and the elbows had worn through to the weave. The sword belt was empty. A martial lord with no sword at his hip is a sentence with the verb cut out. He had sold it or pawned it, or given it to a creditor who did not care what the steel had meant. His hair had gone lank and gray. His shoulders, which I had spent a childhood measuring myself against and always falling short, had come down off their frame. Behind him came Hayden, the sword saint, the golden one, the blade that had never lost a duel and had, somewhere in the last year, lost everything that mattered. He kept his eyes on the floor. He had worn the white and gold to this, the way you wear your finest to a funeral, and the white and gold was stained, and he had buttoned it wrong at the collar, and that one small wrong button told me more than any report Eve had ever set on my table. And behind them both, near the wall where the light was thinnest, an old man in a steward's gray coat, Sebastian. He had pressed 10 coins from his own inheritance into my hand the morning they drove me out, and he had not let go of my wrist until the guards made him, and I had carried those 10 coins farther than I had ever carried the one. I had not known he still lived. The sight of him was the only thing in that hall that came close to undoing me, and I let nothing of it reach my face. My father knelt. He did it the way a tall tree comes down, all at once and against its own nature, and the sound his knees made on the stone went through me like a bell. Then he began to ask. I will not give you his words the way he gave them. He did not deserve to be quoted. He told the great strategist that his house would not see out the season without a shield, that the Duke would erase the Rockwood name from the world and salt the ground it stood on. He offered loyalty. He offered gratitude. He offered the service of his sword, and then remembered, halfway through the sentence, that he had no sword, and the sentence died in his mouth, and he offered it anyway. He said he had nothing left to bargain with but the word of a ruined man, and he laid that word down on the stone in front of me like a beggar laying down a bowl. And then he said, the thing I had crossed a kingdom of my own to hear without knowing I was waiting for it. He said, in the voice of a man confessing to a stranger because there is no one left who remembers, that he had once had another son, a son who might have saved the house had the house known what it held. He did not know where that son was now. He had thrown him out a gate for a single coin, he said, and the coin had been the most expensive thing the house ever spent, and he did not say it to me to move me, because he did not know it was me to move. He said it to the floor. He said it because grief had filled him so full it had to spill somewhere, and the strategist's hall was only the nearest cup. I sat in the high seat, and I felt the boy on the carriage go very still inside me. This was the thing I had built 3 years toward without ever letting myself draw it in words. I had raised that house's income by 2/5 in 3 quiet years and been called useless for it. I had asked Métis on the carriage out whether the house would still stand in 3 years, and the answer had come back flat and certain and cruel. No. And here was the proof of it, kneeling on imperial stone, asking the very son it had discarded for the very thing it had discarded him for being able to do. I could have spoken one word and made him understand. I could have stood and let him see, and watched the recognition take him apart. And I think some part of the hall expected me to, because Sharon, at the foot of the dais, had gone white and still as a drawn blade. She knew them. I had seen the instant she placed the faces, the moment her hand drifted toward her sword without her telling it to, the moment her jaw set so hard I heard it. She knew these were the ones, the coin, the road, the knights who had been ordered to leave me dead in a ditch and call it bandits. She stood there holding a fury that belonged to me, holding it because I had not given her leave to set it down, and the holding cost her more than any wound she had taken in the slums. Hayden spoke then. The sword saint added his voice to his father's, and it cost him visibly. Every word dragged up from somewhere it had been buried. He offered the strategist his blade. He said he had no pride left, only the house, and he would hold any wall, pay any price, kneel as low as the stone went, if it bought his family a future. He did not lift his eyes high enough to find my face, but something moved behind his own, a dread he could not name, the look of a man who has heard a voice in a dream and cannot remember where. Sebastian found it before any of them. The old steward had been studying me the whole while, the way the faithful study an icon, and at last he leaned the smallest degree toward my father and spoke low, not meaning it for the dais. Something in his voice, my lord. I cannot place it. A pause, and his hands tightened on each other. I have stood beside one other man who could hold a room this quiet. My father did not hear him. My father was still kneeling inside his own ruin, but I heard him, and so did Sharon, and for one breath, the whole secret swung on the hinge of a loyal old man's memory. And then the hinge held, because faith is not proof, and Sebastian had only a feeling, and a feeling kneels quietly and prays. Pray he is merciful, I heard him murmur to no one. We have earned little. I let the silence go on past the point of comfort. I let it go on until the asking had nothing left in it, until they had spent every coin of pride they had carried across the border and were kneeling on empty. Then I gave them the only thing I meant to give them that day. I will consider it, I said. 3 words. The exact size of the thing they had given me at the gate. I watched my father take them as a drowning man takes a rope that has not yet been thrown, and I rose, and I left them kneeling, because the man who decides when a petitioner may stand is never the man on the floor. Sharon got the door shut before she let it out. Those are the ones. Her voice came low and shaking, which frightened me more than shouting would have, because Sharon did not shake. The coin, the road, them. She had her back to the door as if she could hold the whole hall behind it. Say the word, and I throw them back through the gate myself. Father, brother, the lot. Let the Duke have what's left. Eve had gone very quiet in the corner, doing the arithmetic I had done a week ago, watching it come out the same. They're my blood, I said. I had never said it to Sharon before. She had followed me through a war on the strength of what I could do, and never once asked what I had been before I could do it. Now she knew, and I watched the knowing land, the kneeling lord, the golden brother, the empty sword belt, all of it rearranged in a heartbeat into the family of the man she had chosen to guard. Her face did a thing I had not seen it do. It broke a little on my behalf. Then it's worse, she said. You sat up there and let your own father grovel, and you never moved a muscle. She searched me. I don't know if that was the strongest thing I've ever watched a man do, or the coldest. It was neither, I said. It was useful. That stopped her. I told them the rest then, because they were going to carry it, and a piece carried blind is a piece carried badly. The family was not a wound I had chosen to reopen. The family was bait. A ruined, visible, desperate house with the strategist's name suddenly half thrown over it was a prize Duke Barnaby's killers could not leave alone. A soft target, a loose end, an insult sitting in the open. The Duke had spent the whole campaign refusing to be predicted. Fine. I had stopped trying to predict him weeks ago. You do not predict a man who decides his moves on the flip of a coin. You build the board the coin lands on, so that heads loses and tails loses, and then you give him something he cannot resist reaching for, and you let him reach. They came to me for a shield, I said. I'm going to give them just enough of one to make them irresistible. Barnaby comes for the bait. We close on him in a place of our choosing. I looked at the shut door, and beyond it, the hall where they were still kneeling. The house that threw me away is going to be the thing that finally puts the Duke in the ground. They'll never know they did it. Eve let out a slow breath. And they keep kneeling the whole time. They keep kneeling, I said, until I decide otherwise. We built the killing ground 3 streets from where I had lodged the family, close enough to tempt, far enough to control. Dustin walked it with me end to end, and where he walked, the ground learned its lines. This was the timid boy I had pulled out of a fortress that ate 1 man in 10, the one who had spent his whole life being told earth magic was labor and not power. He did not believe that anymore. He pressed his palm flat to a wall, and the wall grew a lip of stone a man's stride would not clear in armor. He stamped once, and a flagstone sat a finger lower than its neighbors, and you would not see it until your foot found the wrong place in the dark. When they step in, he said, not looking up, his hands already shaping the next yard of street. The ground steps with us. Every way out of here is a way I close on your word. He sealed a side alley to a false dead end as he said it, smooth as drawing a curtain. Tell me where you want them funneled and they'll go nowhere else. 1 corridor, I said. I want their randomness spent before they reach it. Decoys at both mouths, light where I choose, dark where I don't. Eve was already pacing the sight lines, marking where a watcher could stand and not be seen, where a signal could pass without a lamp. The corridor's clean, she said over her shoulder. No imperial eyes on it but ours. I've kept the capital looking 3 streets the other way, and it'll keep looking there until this is done. She stopped at the far mouth and turned. Whatever falls in here falls quietly. That part I can promise you. A randomizing killer is only unreadable while he has choices. Take the choices away, wall by wall, alley by alley, until the only path left is the one you dug. And the coin does not matter anymore, because every face of it lands in the same grave. Dustin was building me a place where chance went to die. I watched him work and felt the old, plain satisfaction of a piece doing exactly what it was made for. He caught me watching and ducked his head, pleased and trying not to be. You're sure about your part of it, he said. It was not quite a question. I'm sure about yours, I said. Yours is the easy half. The master stroke I kept for last, and I built it out of the man who had once paid knights to kill me on a road. Hayden wanted to be useful. That was the lever. A sword saint with no war to win, and no duel that mattered is a blade screaming in its sheath. And he had knelt in my hall offering to hold any wall I named. So I named one. I had it put to him, through a captain, through rank, never my own mouth too close to his ear, that the strategist would value a sword of his quality on the lodging house wall through the coming nights. That the protection his family sought began with the family proving its worth. That a man who guarded the strategist's interests well might find the strategist generous. He took the post like a starving man takes bread. I stood on the parapet at dusk and watched him climb to it, and he did not know me, and that was the whole of the thing. He set himself at the wall with his ornate longsword bare across his knees, the blade that had decided so many duels and so little else, and he meant to hold that wall all night and every night until it bought his house a future. He told the captain so. He said he did not know this strategist, but he would not fail him. He said, in the flat, exhausted way of a man with nothing left to be proud of, that a wall was a thing he understood, and he would understand it well. He was guarding me. He was guarding the trap I had built to win the war that was killing his house. He had ordered my throat cut on a road years ago and called it the price of a clean inheritance. And now he sat with his back to my interests and his sword pointed at my enemies. And the irony of it was so complete that I felt almost nothing, only the cold, level click of a piece sliding into the one square it had been carved for. There was a dread in him under the duty. I could see it from the parapet in the way he kept glancing back over his shoulder at the dark of the war quarter, as if some part of him had counted the steps from this wall to a ghost it could not name and come up frightened. He fought like he was guarding a brother, the reports had said of the enemy who broke his armies. He would never let himself finish that thought. I had made sure the only place it could lead was a wall in the dark, holding the line for the very man. I let him keep his back to me. I went down off the parapet without a word. A piece does not need to be told it is a piece. Every piece was placed. The bait was set. The ground was shaped. The blade I should have feared most stood guard over me in the dark. There was one thing left to set, and it was the price. I would need one deep reading to time it. Not a guess, not a wall. The exact moment the killers committed, read out of the fog the deep way, the way that takes more than I have to spare. I had asked Matus the question already, alone. The way you ask a thing you do not want answered. If I read deep one more time, would my sight come back inside a week? The certainty arrived flat and final and without mercy, the way it always did. No, I told the team because they had earned the truth, and because a plan carried on a lie rots from the inside. Dustin heard it and his hands stopped moving, which for Dustin was a kind of scream. Tell me there's another way, he said. Tell me you're sure about the eyes. Tell me there's no other way to time it. He already knew the answers. He asked anyway, because asking was the only protest left to him. There's no other way to time it, I said. And I'm sure. Sharon did not argue the price. She had stopped trying to argue me out of paying weeks ago. She drew herself up instead, the silver of her hair catching the lamp, and she made me a different kind of promise. I have the lines drawn. When your sight goes, she said, mine is yours. You won't be in there alone and blind. You'll be in there blind with me, her jaw set. You put your own brother on that wall. You frighten me a little. A breath. We finish this without burying you. That's the only plan I'll accept. I had spent 3 years making myself into a man no one could throw away. I had built a fortune out of a coin, an army's salvation out of a yes or no, and now a duke's grave out of the family that had dug mine. And the last thing I had left to spend on it was the sight in my own eyes. And I was going to spend it, because a man who has been made invisible learns early that there is no price he will not pay to be undeniable. Somewhere across the city, my father knelt in a borrowed room, waiting for a stranger to decide whether his name lived or died, never guessing that the stranger was the answer he had thrown away a kingdom ago. Somewhere on a wall, his golden son held a line for the brother he had tried to kill, and the coin that bought my exile had finally, after 3 years, come down to its last flip. And I was the one holding it, and it was going to land exactly where I chose. Set the pieces, I said. If timing it cost my eyes, it cost my eyes. The lamp guttered. Outside the black windows, the trap sat waiting, baited with my own blood. And the only thing left between me and the end of all of it was one breath, one strike, and one reading. I would not walk away from whole. I have waited longer than this for less. The Duke sent everything that night. I felt it before I could prove it. The street going too quiet, the way a room goes quiet when someone has stopped breathing on purpose. Métis had already given me the shape of it, not the faces. Never the faces. A coin flip killer is fog to the oracle, and the Duke had built a whole guild out of fog. But fog still has to walk down a street. Fog still has to choose a door. And I had spent 3 weeks making sure every door on this street was mine. I stood at the mouth of the lane with Sharon at my shoulder and Dustin a pace behind, his hand flat against the stone like a man listening to a heartbeat through a wall. The lodging house at our backs held my father, my brother, and the broken thing my house had become. They thought they were guarded. They had no idea they were bait. How many? Sharon said. Not really a question. More than he can spare, which means he wants me more than he wants the rest of the empire. One more reading. That was the price, and I had already agreed to pay it, days ago, in a quiet room with the lamp low. Ask whether my sight comes back inside a week, and Métis gives the same flat answer every time. No. I asked it anyway. Then I asked the question that timed the strike, the deep one, the kind that sends the mind all the way down and makes it stay there. The answer came back, and the street went white, and then gray, and then it went out. It did not hurt the way I had braced for. It was gentler than that, and worse. The lamp smeared. The edges of Sharon's face ran together like wet ink. Warmth spread down both cheeks, slow and private, and the world folded shut to a dull red and a ringing dark. I did not fall. I had decided days ago that I would not fall. Adrian, her hand clamped on my arm. She had seen my eyes. Your sight. Gone. On schedule. She went very still. I could not see it, but I knew the shape of that stillness. I had felt the same one across the map table when she swore she would be my eyes and called me a man who frightened her a little. Then we do it your way. Her voice flattened into something lethal. I am the seeing part of you tonight. Don't argue with me about it. I never would. To my right, Dustin's breath hitched. He started to say something about another way, the same plea he had made over the map, and I cut it off. Not unkindly, just final. Dustin, the ground, a pause. Then his palm pressed the stone, and the street answered him, a low, grinding shudder running out under our boots like a thing waking up. It's ours, he got out. His voice shook and held all at once. Tell me when. I could not see the killers coming. I did not need to. I had stopped trying to see them weeks ago. They were already where I had put them. Here is the thing the Duke never understood about his own weapon. A man who decides every move on a coin flip cannot be predicted. Métis had taught me that in blood. I had nearly died learning it, but a coin only matters when both faces of it are worth something. Take away every good outcome, leave a man flipping between bad and worse, and the randomness stops being a shield. It becomes a leash. He flips his coin and walks into a wall either way. So I had never built a plan to outguess them. I had built a corridor where guessing did not help. They hit the lane, and the lane swallowed them. I heard it more than anything. The scuff of soft boots committing to the stone, Dustin's grinding word, the false mouths of the corridor sealing one after another, as raised lips of rock rose where alleys had been a breath before. 3 ways in, 1 way through, and the 1 way through was a throat that closed. "They're in," Sharon said, close to my ear now. Her shoulder set against mine, so I would always know where she stood. 2 breaking left along the wall, 1 high, going for the roofline. The roofline's Randall's, already handled your blindness. The beau's dry voice drifted down from somewhere above, unbothered as ever. He picked the only beam I left standing. People get so predictable when you give them just the one bad idea. A short hiss of air, a grunt, cut off. 1 down, taken, not killed. I had been clear about that with every one of them, bound and breathing. The Empire needed to watch a guild dragged into the light, not count a pile of bodies it could call a massacre. "Left pair," I said. "Let them reach the sunk flagstones." "They're reaching them. Now, Dustin." The ground dropped, not far, a man's height, no more, into a pit he had shaped and skinned over to look like more corridor. I heard the scrabble, the curses, a blade clanging off stone that was not where their feet had expected stone to be. "The door's mine," Eve called from the front, clipped and certain. "Nothing reaches the family but through me. Run your maze." I stood in the middle of it, blind, and I watched the whole thing anyway, not with my eyes, with theirs. Sharon was the left flank. Randall was the roof. Dustin was the ground itself. Eve was the door. I had spent 3 years being invisible, learning to run a thing no one could see me running. Doing it without eyes was only the same trick, pulled 1 shade tighter. A blade came for me out of the dark. I knew because Sharon stopped narrating and simply moved. Steel met steel a hand's width from my throat. A body folded past me, then quiet. "Stay on your feet." Her breath was hot at my temple. "I have the front. You have the plan. Keep handing it to me. They'll try the right wall next. It looks open. It's the worst door in here." She laughed once with nothing warm in it. "You built a house where every door is the wrong one. For him. Only for him." I could feel the fight narrowing, the way water narrows toward a drain. A guild of killers who lived and died by chance, funneled into a place where chance went to die. They flipped their coins. Every face came up loss. It should have been enough. It was not, because the Duke had kept 1 blade I had never fully measured, and that blade walked into my corridor and made the whole thing bend. His name was Tobias, though I only learned that later, when he was on his knees and willing to give it. In the corridor, he was only a difference in the sound. The randomizers had a rhythm even in their randomness, a jagged, stuttering thing, here then gone, then somewhere stupid. Tobias had none. He moved like a man reading the same page I was reading. Where I closed a door, he was already turning from it. Where the ground fell, he was already past the lip. He had trained a guild to be unreadable, and somewhere along the way had made himself the one thing in it worth reading, and there was no time left to read him. Sharon felt it before she found the words. Her narration thinned. The cool, flat calling of the field went tight at the edges, then went quiet in the particular way that means a fighter has stopped being able to talk and swing at the same time. "He's good," she got out. "Adrian, he is very good. He's walking the maze like he drew it. He didn't draw it. Tell him that." The line bent. I heard it bend. The front edge of my plan, the seam where Eve and the corridor met, giving a step, then another. Blind, I ran the only arithmetic left to me. Sharon could not leave the center or the center fell. Dustin could not lift his hands from the stone or the maze opened. Randall had 1 beam and 1 angle. I had no blade and no eyes. And the man unmaking my trap was the single piece I could not answer. Except I had set 1 more piece on the board days ago and told myself I would never need it. I had put my brother on that wall. I had done it the cold way, through a captain, through a rank, so my own voice never came near him. A strong sword posted to guard the strategist's flank, blind to whose flank it was. He had taken the post the way a starving man takes bread, and now the maze bent toward him, and the deadliest blade Barnaby owned walked straight into the only blade in the Empire that had never once lost a duel. I heard the sword saint wake. There is a sound a truly great blade makes, and it is not loud, it is clean. 1 stroke, and the bending stopped. Another, and the line straightened and held. My brother fought the way he had always fought, beautifully, arrogantly, certain the world owed him the win. And for once, the world paid out, because for once, he stood exactly where a battle needed him, instead of where his pride wanted him. He shouted something over the steel. I caught the shape of it through Sharon. that the wall held while he stood on it, that whoever the strategist was, his ground was good ground. He thought he was saving a stranger. He thought he was saving himself. He had no idea the wall he held was mine, that the brother he had ordered, left dead in a ditch on a road 3 years gone, stood 20 feet behind him, blind and bleeding, using him like a tool pulled off a shelf. The blade that won duels and lost wars finally won a battle, and it won it for me. I should have felt triumph. What I felt was colder and more exact. The click of a planned thing slotting into place, and far beneath it, a single quiet ache I did not have the time to hold. Push them to the choke, I said. Sharon, now Tobias is the only one left standing in it. With his guild gone into the pits and the dark, Tobias was one man in a sealed corridor, and one man was a problem I had already solved. He had spent the whole night fighting the maze. Not once had he fought me, because there was nothing of me to fight. No sword arm, no front, no eyes to faint toward. I was a voice in the dark moving his world around him, and Sharon was the edge that voice carried. When his killers stopped flipping coins because there were no coins left to flip, the maze closed its last door on the man who had taught them all to run. It did not take long, and I will not pretend I followed every stroke. Blind, you learn to trust the sounds and let the rest go. I heard Sharon set her feet. I heard the particular silence of a master weighing whether the next exchange is worth dying over. I heard a blade hit stone and not get picked up again. He's down. Her breath came ragged now, the performance finally cracking back into a person. Disarmed, bound, breathing, taken, exactly the way you wanted him. Good, you're certain? Alive is harder to keep than dead. Alive is the entire point. A dead assassin is a rumor. A bound one, hauled into daylight with his guild's marks still on him, is a confession the whole empire can read at noon. I needed the confession far more than I needed the corpse. I had told them all, before any of this began. No killing I could avoid. No body I could turn into a thing the Duke's friends would call a slaughter. Break the guild. Do not martyr it. They got him kneeling, and he talked. Not out of fear. I would come to understand there was very little fear in him. He spoke the flat way professionals speak when the contract is finished and only the accounting is left. Bound, blood drying at one temple, he told the dark that he had been beaten plenty of ways across plenty of years, but never once by a man who could not see the board. And then he said the thing I have kept. He said the strategist kept a master worth dying for, which was more than he had ever been able to say of the man who paid him. I did not answer that. There was nothing I could say to it that would not cheapen it. I only turned my blind face toward the sound of him and let the silence stand for the both of us. Somewhere above and behind, a network that had owned the slums of the capital for 20 years felt its spine pulled out. Tobias was the last knot. With him bound, the rope came apart all the way up to the Duke. Sharon, where is he? Where is Barnaby? A pause. The grim satisfaction in her voice when it came was a thing I could have warmed my hands at the gate, watching it all fall down. He came to see you die, and he isn't leaving. I had never once beaten Duke Barnaby. I want to be honest about that, even now. Not in all the months he hunted me had I ever read his mind clean. He was the single wall the Oracle could not see through. A man who had spent a lifetime making himself unreadable, who shielded his thoughts the way other men shield their throats, who turned my greatest weapon to fog every time I aimed it at him. If the night had been a duel of foresight, he would have won it. He knew that. He had built the whole war on it. So I did not fight him with foresight. I fought him with a street. They walked me out to the gate square, Sharon's hand at my elbow, my eyes full of dark and my face still wet. I could not see the Duke. I have wondered since whether that was a mercy or a theft, to break a man and never once watch his face do it. But I did not need to see him. I could hear the square, and the square told me everything. It told me his men were not coming because they were in the pits behind me. It told me his blade was not coming because Tobias knelt in my corridor handing the Empire its confession. It told me the lamps were up, every shuttered window opening, every imperial eye Eve had kept 3 streets back, now let in close, because the time for quiet was finished and the time to be seen had come. The Shadow Duke, standing in the light, nothing in his hands. He spoke to me. I will not give you his words the way he gave them, because his words were the last weapon he had, and I will not let him swing them here. He began the way men like him always begin, smooth, reasonable, a door held open. There was still an arrangement to be made, he suggested. A man of my talents, a man of his reach. The Empire was large. Surely there was room in the shadows for 2. He offered me the leash. one more time. The same leash he had held out the first time we ever stood in a room together, when I told him to his face that I would not kneel. I let him finish, then I told him no, and I told him why, and I made certain the open square heard all of it. You built your whole life on never being seen, I said. So I made the whole empire look at you. That's the trick. That's the entire trick. You were never going to lose a game of shadows to me, so I dragged you out where there are no shadows. And now there is nothing left of you to hide behind. The silk went out of his voice then. I heard it go. Whatever had lived under the silk all those years, the fury, the contempt, the flat disbelief that a discarded nobody with a yes or no parlor trick had walked him into the open by his own choices. It all came up at once, and it had nowhere left to go. He had spent 20 years being a rumor. A rumor cannot survive being looked at, and I had made certain every face in the capital was looking. He came at me. Of course he did. A man with nothing left reaches for the one thing still in front of him, and the one thing in front of him was a blind boy he thought he could close his hands around. He never reached me. Sharon was already there. She had been there the whole time, the seeing part of me, the edge I carried instead of a sword. One motion. The Duke went down onto the stones of the square he had ruled from the dark for half my life. Disarmed, held, finished, not dead. I had been very clear that he would not be dead. This was the part men would argue over for years, and I knew it, even kneeling there. I could have ended him, blind, bleeding, with the whole empire watching and every right in the world. I could have closed my hand and had it done, and no one would have faulted me for it. I did not. I lowered myself slowly, because blind men kneel slowly, until I judged my face was level with his, and I told him the last true thing I had, that death was an exit, that he had spent his whole life selling exits to other people, and I was not going to sell him one. He would live. He would live stripped and seen and owned by the light, in a world that now knew his name and his face, and exactly how small he had always been. The shadow does not die. The shadow gets the lamp turned on it and kept on it forever. Then I stood and turned my back on him and let the square take him away. They had watched the whole of it from the lodging house steps. I had not planned for them to see it, or that is not quite true. I had planned for them to be alive to see it, which is a different thing, and I had not let myself look too closely at the difference. The family that threw me out with one coin stood at the edge of my killing ground and watched a strategist they could not name take apart the Duke, who would have finished what their own ruin had started. My father was there. I could not see him. I did not have to. I know the sound of my father's silence the way you know a room from childhood in the dark. Days ago, he had knelt to me already, blind to my face, begging for the shield I was even then sharpening. Now, he had watched the shield used. Sharon told me, lo, what his face was doing, and I will not set it down here, because some things are mine and not the audience's. It was enough to know that the man who had measured all worth by the sword had just watched a man with no sword at all do what no blade in his house could have done. My brother stood near him, the sword saint loose in his hand, still breathing hard from the wall he had held without ever once knowing whose wall it was. He looked at me. Sharon said he could not stop looking at me. Something worked behind his face that he could not name. A pull, a wrongness, a question shaped like a memory he had ordered buried on a road 3 years before. He had fought all night for a stranger. Now he stared at the stranger and felt the ground tilt under a certainty he had built his entire life upon, and he did not understand why. He almost said it. I heard him draw the breath that comes right before a name. I did not let him have it. Not yet. Not blind and bleeding in the cold, with the Duke's men still being hauled out of the pits. The name was mine to give, and I would give it when I chose. On my own ground, turning whatever was left of my eyes toward them on purpose. Not here, not as an accident, not as a thing pried loose from the dark by a brother's half-formed dread. So I turned my ruined face away from the both of them, toward Sharon, toward the only part of the world I could still steer by sound. Take me home, I said. I'm done seeing for tonight. And I left them there, wondering who had just saved their lives. The whole proud house of Rockwood, standing in my square, in the cold, revering a ghost. They would learn his name soon enough, but not yet. I had told Sharon to take me home. I had said I was done seeing for the night. I meant it, the way a man means anything when he has spent every last clear thing inside himself and only wants the dark to be quiet for a while. I did not take a single step. The square behind me was still full of breath. The Duke was in the dust where the lamps could own him. His men were in the pits Dustin had made, and on the lodging house steps, where Eve had held the door all night, the family I had been winning and losing for 3 years stood exactly where the fighting had left them, too stunned to kneel any lower, too afraid to rise. My father did not know who he had just watched. That was the thing I kept turning over in the red dark behind my ruined eyes. He had measured every soul he ever met by the sword, and he had just seen a man with no sword at all do the one thing his whole house could not. He revered it. I could hear it in the way his breathing had gone careful, the way a man breathes near something holy. He revered a ghost. I had built it that way on purpose. I had let the name be a rumor and a rank and a legend because a name given by accident is worth nothing. And I had decided years ago on a carriage with one coin closed in my fist that when they finally looked up at me, they would know exactly what they were looking at. There was nothing left to gain by hiding. The Duke was broken. The war was won. The only thing the dark was protecting now was them, letting them keep for one more minute the comfortable lie that the hero who saved their house was a stranger. I was not going to let them keep it, so I turned around, slowly, because turning was all I had the strength left to do well. I lifted what was left of my eyes toward the two of them, my father, my brother, and I let them see my face. For a long moment, nobody in that square made a sound. Then, my brother said a name into the cold, not loudly, almost like a man testing whether a word will hold his weight before he stands on it. He said it was me. He said the ghost had been me, all along. I did not answer him. I only let him keep looking, because the looking was the answer. My father made a sound then that I had never heard him make in my life. A small, broken, disbelieving thing. My name half finished inside it. The word it cannot be folded around it like he could argue the truth back into the dark if he just refused it hard enough. The strategist, his son. He could not hold both of those in one breath, and watching him try to was the closest I have ever come to feeling the years all at once. I had imagined this moment 10,000 ways on 10,000 colder nights. I had imagined screaming it. I had imagined laughing. I had imagined saying nothing at all and simply walking away to let the not knowing rot in them. What I actually felt, standing there blind and swaying and finally seen, was none of those. It was quieter than any of them. It was the strange flat stillness of a wound that has been held open and aching for 3 years, suddenly being allowed, at last, to close. I could not see their faces. That is the part the stories would never get right. I had spent the last clear sight in my body, breaking the Duke, and so the single moment I had planned my whole exile around, the moment I had wanted to watch more than anything in the world, came to me only as sound and shape in a red dark. The careful breathing, the half-finished word, the shuffle of my father's boots in the dust as the ground of his certainty went out from under him. And the strange thing was that it did not matter. I did not need to see their faces to know what was on them. I had read that house for 19 years. I knew the exact register of my father's silence when a truth he could not argue with walked into the room. I knew the sound my brother made when the floor of his self-worth cracked. I had spent my whole life being the one who saw without being seen. And even now, blind at the very end, I was still the one who saw. "Look at me, father," I said. That was all. 2 words, and the whole square leaned into them. Sharon came up at my shoulder. She did not say anything yet. She just put herself there, soot along her jaw, and her blade still bare, so that whatever I chose to do next, I would not do it alone. I felt the warmth of her at my side, and I was grateful for it in a way I did not have the strength to say. I looked at the man who had thrown me away. "You called my skill a scam," I said. "A coin trick, a useless mouth answering yes and no in a house built on the sword." He flinched at it. I made myself go on, slow and exact, the way you lay coins on a table, one at a time, so a man has to watch the whole count. For 3 years before that day, I ran your estate, your ledgers, your harvests, your debts, your every thin season. I raised what your house earned by more than 40%, and not one of you ever once asked how. You thought the walls held themselves up. They did not. I did, invisibly, unthanked. And the day my brother's blade lit up gold, you decided the boy who had been quietly keeping the roof over your heads was a burden you could no longer afford. The 40% landed on him like a stone going into still water. I watched the understanding spread out from it in rings, that the prosperity he had taken as his due, the buffer that had let him sneer at me, had been the very thing he exiled. "You gave me 1 coin, I said. The square was so quiet, I could hear the torch sputter. 1. A single silver coin dropped at my feet, and you called it preparation money. I held it in my palm on the carriage out, and I did the arithmetic, because arithmetic was the only thing you ever left me. A coin like that buys a week of bread if a man is careful. Nothing at all if he isn't. You thought you were throwing away a burden. You were throwing away the only person who could have saved you." My father's legs went out from under him, not theatrically, just a slow, helpless folding, a proud man's body refusing to hold a truth his pride could not. He knelt in the dust of the square, and the words that came out of him were not for show and not for mercy. He named it himself in a low, ruined voice, that he had thrown away the one who could have saved them, and that he had done it with his own mouth. He said he had no right to ask me for anything, and that he was, nonetheless, entirely at my mercy now. I had waited 3 years to hear my father admit he was wrong. I had thought it would taste like winning. It tasted like nothing at all. It was just true. There is a thing nobody tells you about being right when it costs you everything. You imagine, on the cold nights, that vindication will arrive like warmth, that the moment the people who broke you finally understand, something in you will unclench and be whole. It does not work that way. Watching my father kneel in the dust did not give me back the 3 years. It did not give me back the boy on the carriage who had to teach himself not to cry where the driver could hear. The damage was already done, years ago, with 1 coin. All his kneeling did now was move the weight of it off of me and onto him, where it had belonged the whole time. That is not joy. It is just the correct distribution of a debt. Then I turned what was left of my eyes on my brother, and this was the one I had been carrying the longest. "Tonight," I said, "your sword guarded my life." He went very still. "You stood on a wall and you held a line, and your sword saint turned a fight that was bending the wrong way. The strongest blade in the kingdom, finally winning a battle instead of a duel. And you did not even know whose life you were saving." I let that sit. Then I gave him the rest of it, because he had earned every inch of the rest of it. 3 years ago, you sent men to kill me on a road. You gave the order yourself. They were supposed to leave me in a ditch, and you were supposed to come home the only son. I remember every step of that road. I remember the cold. I remember knowing with absolute certainty that the answer to whether they meant to do it was yes. My brother broke. I have spent a long time deciding how to describe it without making it ugly, and the truest thing I can say is this. Everything he had built himself out of came apart at once. The golden sun, the undisputed heir, the blade that was the strongest thing in any room. He had spent his whole life being the sword, and he had just learned that the sword was never the point, that across every battlefield where his glory had quietly curdled into defeat, the thing beating him had been the mind of the brother he ordered murdered, and that tonight, blind and bleeding, that same brother had reached out and used him like a tool, and saved his whole house with his own discarded hands. He said the blade had been the strongest in the kingdom, and it had never once mattered against me. He said it the way a man says the thing he is most afraid is true. He had tried to take my life on that road, and tonight he had bled to keep it. Both of those were now things he had to carry inside the same body for the rest of his. I did not enjoy it. I want that on the record. I had imagined I would. I had imagined, on the worst nights, that watching my brother understand would be the sweetest thing in my life. It was not sweet. It was just the truth finally being where it belonged, out in the open, in the light, between the two of us, instead of buried in a ditch on a road 3 years gone. Here is the irony I had been holding all night, the one I had not let myself feel until exactly this moment. My brother's blade was a gift from the heavens, a skill out of legend. The whole kingdom called him Sword Saint and meant it, and mine was a voice that only ever answered yes or no, a thing my own family called a scam, a parlor trick, a useless mouth. For 3 years, that was the official accounting of which of us mattered. And tonight, on a wall in the dark, the legendary blade had served the useless trick without knowing it, had bled to defend the very life it was raised to end. The strongest sword in the kingdom had spent its finest hour as a tool in the hand of the brother it tried to murder. If there is a God who keeps the ledgers, that is the entry I would point to. Not the Duke, not the war, that. Someone moved at the edge of the steps. Old, careful steps, a body that did not move fast anymore, and then a voice I had not heard in 3 years and had never once, in all that time, forgotten. Sebastian. He came out of the thinning smoke and he was weeping openly, the way only an old man unafraid of being seen will weep. He did not bow. He did not call me ghost or strategist or my lord. He looked up into my ruined face and his whole life's faith was in it. "Young master," his voice shook and held. "I prayed it was you. From the moment I heard your voice carry across that gate, I prayed it was you. I felt something move in my chest that the Duke and the war and the blindness had not been able to touch. You gave me 10 coins, I said. He nodded, and the tears came faster, and he was not ashamed of a single one of them. The morning they cast me out with their 1 coin, this old man had pressed 10 more into my hand. 10 coins out of his own inheritance, his own small saved life, slipped to me at the gate where no one with the Rockwood name would stoop to look. Their one, his 10. For 3 years, that arithmetic had been the only proof I carried that I had ever been worth keeping. I would do it again, he said. He said he had told them, the very day they threw me out, that the house would fall without me. They had laughed at the old steward and his soft heart, and then he straightened his thin shoulders as far as they would go, and he said the house had fallen, exactly as he warned. And here I stood above all of it, living proof in front of everyone who had ever doubted that someone had always believed. I have been cold to a great many people in my life, and I have been cold on purpose, and most of the time I do not regret it. I was not cold to Sebastian. Everyone here threw a coin, I told him. Quiet, just for the two of us, though the whole square heard it. You threw 10. I have been keeping the difference for 3 years. Tonight, I am paying it back. Sharon, beside me, said the thing I could not say myself. Now they know what they threw away. Blunt, clipped, and for the old man's sake, she said it gently. Then lower, only for me. Whatever I chose for them, mercy or judgment, she was beside me, and the word was mine. So there it was, the whole thing laid out in the dust at dawn, my father kneeling, my brother hollowed out beside him, the duke who would have devoured them broken behind me, and every soul in that square, the petitioners and the soldiers and the great frightened house of Rockwood, waiting on one word from a blind man they had once thrown out with a single coin. It would have been so easy to kill them. The law would have allowed it. The empire would have looked the other way. The strategist who broke the duke could spend 2 lives, and no one would so much as raise a brow. In the source of every bitter story I had told myself on the road, that is exactly how it ends. The wronged man takes everything back in blood, and the curtain falls red. I felt Dustin come up on my other side, dust-caked and nervous and proud, and Eve at the steps where she had held the door, and Sharon at my shoulder, and old Sebastian below, and I understood, standing among the people I had chosen, exactly why I was not going to do it. I will not kill you, I said. The words went out flat over the square, and I felt the family flinch harder at mercy than they would have at a blade. If I killed you, I would be exactly what you decided I was, a thing that solves its problems by erasing them. The man you threw away because his answer to the family's prosperity, once, long ago, was a simple, honest no. I let the breath out slow. I am not going to become the proof you were right about me, so you will live. I turned my face toward my father, toward the place where I knew he knelt. You will live with all of it. The 40% you never thanked me for, the coin you measured my worth in, the road you sent my brother to leave me dead on. Every remaining day, you will wake up knowing the son you called useless is the one holding your house up, and that he chose to let you keep it. That is my judgment. It is heavier than dying, and I mean it to be. I meant every word of it, and I had thought about it for longer than they would ever know. Death is an exit. I had said as much to the Duke an hour before, when I let him live in his ruin instead of buying him the clean escape of an ending. The same logic held for my father and my brother, only more so. If I killed them, the story would close, and they would be free of it, and the kingdom would tell it as a tragedy where everyone paid the same price in the end. I did not want them free of it. I wanted them awake inside it. I wanted my father to lift a ledger some gray morning years from now and feel the 40% in his hands like a wound. I wanted my brother to draw his famous sword and remember, the one night it mattered was the night it served the man he wronged. Mercy, made of the right materials, is the heaviest sentence there is. My father bowed his head all the way to the dust. He said I could have ended them, and I had chosen to make them carry it instead. He said I was more than he had ever been, and that he saw it now, too late. The words coming out of him, like something being set down that he would never be allowed to pick back up. My brother lifted his face, the sword saint looking up. He said his sword had never been the strongest thing in this story, that I had been, and that he had tried to take my life, and I had handed his back, and that he would spend whatever was left of it earning the right to have stood on my wall. I let them have those words. I did not soften toward them, and I did not pretend the wound was gone, but I let them stand in front of the whole square, and I let the thing I had vowed on a carriage with a coin in my fist finally, fully come true. The family that threw me away stood in my square at dawn and looked up at me. It was over. The oldest thing in me, the thing that had been bleeding quietly under every plan I ever made, was finally closed. And I want to be honest about what that felt like, because the stories never are. It did not feel like triumph. It felt like setting down a weight I had carried so long that my body had forgotten its own shape without it. I stood in the gray light with the people I had chosen, and I let myself, for the first time since a road 3 years gone, simply be tired. Métis was quiet. It is always quiet when there is nothing left to ask. I had spent the last clear sight in my body, breaking the Duke, and the world was still folded down to a dull red dark at the edges. And I knew, the way I always knew things, that this was not the last price the Oracle would take from me. The gift that made me would bleed me for the rest of my life. Headaches, the dark closing in when I leaned on it too hard, a body that paid in full for every answer. I had made my peace with that a long time ago. A man who reads fate does not get to be whole. I had decided, somewhere on the way up, that I would rather be the man who sees and bleeds than the man who is comfortable and blind. I made the trade with open eyes, the only kind of eyes I had left. Sharon asked me, low, whether I wanted to go home now, for real this time. Soon, I said, because there was one more thing in the dark, and I had felt the shape of it all night. Barnaby had been a shadow, one shadow, and a man who reads fate learns the size of a thing by the size of the hole it leaves. And the hole the Duke left looking up at the empire above him was not the hole of the biggest shadow in the room. There were larger ones, older ones, powers that had let the Duke play in the shallows and never once stirred. I had pulled one of them into the light tonight, and in doing it, I had made the rest of them learn a name they had never bothered to learn before. Mine. Tobias is alive, I said, half to Sharon, half to the cold. The guild is broken, but not gone. A bound chief and a cracked guild are not a corpse. They are a thread, and a thread leads somewhere. Dustin asked in his nervous way whether that meant it was not finished. I almost smiled. I had not done that in a while. Barnaby was one shadow, I told them. There are larger ones, and now they know my name. I turned my ruined face toward the waking capital, toward all the dark I could no longer see, and could still, somehow, perfectly feel. Good, let them. Sharon put her hand on my shoulder and turned me toward home, and Dustin fell in on the other side, and Eve came down off the steps, and old Sebastian, who had thrown 10 coins against their one and lived to see it answered, walked just behind us into the new light. Below us, in the square, the great house of Rockwood was still on its knees, still looking up, at the sun they had paid off with a single coin and thrown away, and never once looked at, until there was nothing left to do but look up. That coin bought my exile. In the end, it bought the man who held their whole world in his hands and chose, with all of it his to spend, to simply walk home.